to your day. Well, for some of you, it may be a start or mid-morning, some might be late afternoon. My name is Jill Cantor, and I've been in the staffing industry for 17 years with David Applin Group. I'm based out of Winnipeg. I started off with David Applin in a recruitment capacity, running a sales and marketing desk on a permanent basis. And then over the years, my role evolved into that of leadership, mentorship. And then for the last 6+ years, I've been running our training and development department, and specifically with a focus on training our new consultants and our experienced consultants and our leaders on excelling in their own careers. I really am happy to be going through this particular session. I'm very passionate about recruitment and selection in terms of how do you identify great candidates? How do you select the candidates? What are the methods that you go through in the overall process? Because without great candidates, we don't have great placements. And so this is something that I feel very passionate about. We are going to do a lot of collaborating. My hope is we'll have a lot of collaborating. And my real goal is that you will each walk away with at least one takeaway, right? One how-to that might strengthen your recruitment. If you haven't already done so, I would recommend, powering off your cell phones, turning off your emails if you can. Of course, we know that there's some emergencies and things that creep up, but to really utilize this time to learn and to grow and to develop. I also highly, highly recommend that you take lots of notes. There's a lot of content. Jennifer will be sharing with you tomorrow the full PDF slide with all of the notes and everything that I am going to be sharing with you today. But certainly do take some notes on the worksheets that you might already have as well. And ask lots of questions. Like I said, I want this to be collaborative. I want it to be engaging. I want you to come off mute and ask questions. I want you to type things into chat. I'll do my best to respond to as many of the chat questions as possible. But again, let's make this as collaborative as we can. But just so that everyone becomes comfortable with the chat function, if you haven't used it already in Zoom, which I'm sure most of us have, at least in the last couple of years, I'd like you to type into chat a couple of things that I'd like to learn a little bit about you guys. So one would be, how long have you been in the staffing industry? So choose one of these areas. And what type of desk? Are you running a temp desk? Do you do temp and contract? Are you doing direct hire and permanent? Do you have a hybrid? And then what's your specific role? So are you a recruiter? So are you running that recruitment fulfillment side? Are you doing purely business development? Are you doing 360? You're running both sides of the desk. Or are you an account manager? So love to learn a little bit about you guys and see where you all fall in there. So I've got 3 to 10 years, hybrid recruiter. Over 10 years, hybrid and founder. 3 to 10 years, temp to perm. 10+ years, temporary then leadership. Okay. 6 years. Okay, so a whole variety here. We've got lots of experience in this particular group, which is great. So a lot of this will be a refresher and just some new nuggets. And again, of course, help you throughout your CPC program. So 2 years. Okay. All right, guys, great. 5 years, 10+ years. Okay, certainly under 1 year. Awesome. Great to see the diversity in the group. Lots of different years of experience, types of roles, and desks that you're currently operating. One of the things that's always important to remember, since this is facilitated through ACSESS, is understanding our code of ethics and then our mission statement. As members of the Association of Canada Search, Employment and Staffing, we commit to uphold a code of ethics and standards and to display it prominently in our place of business. We support the principles set forth below and acknowledge that compliance with these principles is in the best interest of ACSESS members, companies, their clients, employees, client organizations, and the reputation of the search, employment, and staffing service profession in Canada. And to look at what our mission statement is. So just to let you know, if you don't already know, if you go to the ACSESS website, the mission statement, all of those, this type of information is on there, plus tons of other different information. It's just a wealth of good knowledge and insights on the website directly. But the overall mission is to identify, communicate, and monitor industry standards, ethical business practices, positively influence and protect the regulatory and business environment that impacts our members and the people they serve, promotes credibility and visibility to the industry, to the business community, government, and the general public, and then to provide our members with strategic support services, programs, and tools to assist you in achieving your goals and objectives, like what you're currently doing today as you're learning through the CPC. So before we get started, one of the things that I want to break down is the definition. And of course, it might seem obvious because we're all in recruiting, but what is the actual definition of recruitment? And then how would we go about in defining selection? So I'd love to see if there's anybody who would like to just hop on, turn your mute off, and just give me your perspective on how you would identify and define recruitment, and then we'll look at selection in relation to that.
I think the process, sorry.
No,
Can I speak?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the process is two parts. In my perspective, what I see recruitment is the process of gathering the candidate pool. And step two in the process would be the selection of the pool that's gathered. So recruitment is the process of gathering the people, and then the selection is from those that's gathered. We select the best candidates from the group. That's how I see it.
Awesome. And that was Ramon that was speaking?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so basically the recruitment and selection is obviously the most important aspect of running new and established businesses alike. We can be busy getting lots of job orders and doing all that stuff, but if we're not doing the recruiting and the selecting of the appropriate individuals, we're not making those placements. So the right employees will obviously take either the right candidates will take your business to new heights, and then your client's business to new heights as well. And we know that the wrong ones can hurt the business by missing the boat. So how do we look at that that recruitment piece on finding those right people, and then of course that selecting which ones are we actually bringing forward to the clients. So recruitment is the process, like you said, of choosing the right person for the right position at the right time. Recruitment also of attracting, selecting, and appointing potential candidates to meet the organization's resource requirements. And then the selection, to echo what you said, is the purpose is to find the best candidate for the job, an individual who possesses and requires the key KSAOs and personality, who will perform well, embrace the corporate mission and values, and fit the organization's cultures. So before I go to the next slide, does anybody know, or maybe you can throw it into chat, what does the acronym stand for, KSAO? What does that stand for? Without doing a quick Google check, what comes to mind? KSAO, knowledge, skills, and other attributes. Okay, perfect. Knowledge, skills, and other attributes. So of course, during our recruitment process, we're looking, do they have the knowledge? Do they have the skills? Do they have the other attributes that the clients are looking for? And then of course, during that selection phase, how good are they at those things to help us decide who they are? So again, there are other requirements, the attributes to perform the job, right? So is it the factual, is it procedural information that can be applied? What is the knowledge? Maybe they have foreign languages, computer programming languages. What are those things that they bring to the table that echoes and aligns with what the client's requirements may be? So there are a variety of different influencing factors that are something that we want to have under consideration when we are looking at that recruitment and selection side of things. And specifically, there's key influences by the client. So some of the things that we want to be thinking about is, what are some of those factors, right? And then we'll talk about why it's important to you. In chat, again, I'm going to refer to chat often. Type in, what are some of the influencing factors by the client that might impact our recruitment and selection of their event, a particular search? What are some of the key influences by the client? And that ultimately affect the hiring process. Okay, years of experience, compensation, software, state of the business, how long position's been open, the cost, diploma that are required, current market conditions. Yeah, it's a tight market right now. What are some other things that might be influences by the clients that affect the hiring decision? Top 3 skills they are looking for. Certifications, right? So what kind of certifications do the candidates need? Skills, culture, experience, education, competencies, money. Okay. How soon they are looking to fill this position, right? So what's that urgency? Okay. So as some of those are coming in, I will show you some of the key influencing factors. So money is a big one. Relationship with the recruiters, right? What kind of relationship do we have with the client? Do we have a trusted relationship? Are they somebody that you've worked with in the past? Do they trust that you know what you're doing? Do they have the confidence in your ability and that of your firm? What level is the position to fill, right? So what is that level? Which can dictate how easy or not easy it may be to find somebody. What are the current market conditions, right? What's going on in the market? Right now, it's a crazy, crazy competitive candidate market. It's a candidate-driven market. What is the state of their internal business? What's happening internally? What are their company policies, right? How does that dictate the hiring process? And right now, as we're all aware, companies are changing lots of their policies, right? Particularly around things around the pandemic. And how does that affect the hiring process? Different legislations, right? And then time constraints, right? The time constraints also, what is their realistic expectation? How quickly are they looking to find somebody? And of course, we all run different desks, right? If you're temp, they might need somebody like right now. If they needed perm, right? And maybe you've got a couple more weeks to get candidates in front of them, right? So it all varies. And then there's 2 really important objectives. Well, there's lots of important objectives in the recruitment hiring process, but I wanted to cover a couple of key ones that really will impact how we may operate and how quickly we may be able to find some candidates at the same time. And then if you're a recruiter or a search consultant, we're all well aware of the fact that there are multiple objectives in the recruiting and the hiring process, but not all recruitment objectives are necessarily created equal. Just like everything else, there's more important ones than others. And it would make sense that the ones that are the most important that ultimately lead directly to success. So we're going to take a look at what some of those may be. And it really can help us, these factors, these overall objectives might dictate that successful placement of the best candidate for the position. So let's take a look at what a couple of those are. So the most important objectives of recruitment during the hiring process. So one of them, and is what we're going to be talking about today, is the balanced candidate evaluation, right? So we have to take that balanced candidate evaluation. So that comes down to number 1, how are we finding candidates? How are we receiving and reviewing resumes? How are we screening the candidates? How are we interviewing the candidates? How are we testing the candidates? Reference checking, background checking, right? So doing a balanced candidate evaluation to make sure that we're bringing the right candidates forward, right? So what's their capability to do the job? What's their willingness to do the job, right? Which is a separate matter altogether. And then their ability to really impact and work with their peers and management and subordinates. So these are some of the things that, and plus many other things, but this is just a short list of what are those things that we need to be considering when we're taking a balanced look at it. And then the big one here again is their willingness to join the organization. So we will have a little bit of dialogue around candidates' motivations and career wounds or pain points, things like that, on what's that willingness, right? How ready are they? We want to make sure that this is where the company culture and the employer branding enter the picture. An organization and any recruiter working with that organization must brand our clients in a positive way, right? This is not just during the recruiting and hiring process. It's an objective of recruitment that is non-negotiable, right? No matter how good the job is itself, if the candidate does not feel compelled to work for the organization, then it doesn't matter how good the job is, right? So it's how are we presenting the opportunities to the candidates? How are we getting them engaged? How are we creating passion and enthusiasm for that role? And then presenting that back to the candidate to get them to also be interested and excited, with never misrepresenting what the role or the company truly offers. Now, one of the things that I'm going to ask you guys is that we want to, well, before I say anything, I'm going to ask this question. Who is your main competitor? And if you guys want to come off and all pipe in at the same time, that's all good. Who is your main competitor? And I don't mean other firms, not referring to firms, but who is your main competitor?
Doing it yourself.
Say that one more time.
Doing it yourself.
Well, what do you mean by that? I'm sorry, who says
Client.
that?
The clients want to do it themselves.
Oh, the clients want to do it themselves. Okay. Okay. Yeah. What else? What else is your main source of competition?
I think in general, like it's just the speed. And that can be either, again, the client, again, that is sourcing for the candidates themselves, or another agency that presented the candidate sooner.
Okay. Right. Awesome. Well, there's lots of competition that we have to be thinking about, right? So of course, our other firms, we're competing with LinkedIn, we're competing with Indeed, we're competing with all sorts of things. But the first ones that kind of said that is, yes, right, our client's own team. So we are in competition with our own clients, right? Unless they've come to us and let's say it's a search where they are engaging us or doing an engagement fee, or there's a retainer, things like that, where it's really exclusive or we've been able to. But typically speaking, right, and especially when we're dealing with temp and contract and other things where we're not necessarily getting that fee up front, it's their own team. So we are competing against our own clients, right, for their HR, their internal recruiters, promotions, transfers, former employees that either might come back or know somebody who knows somebody, their own job postings, right, they put on their website, they put on LinkedIn, Indeed, their employee referrals, right? A lot of our clients and a lot of our own companies have an employee referral program, right? You get $1,000 if we hire the person and they last their guarantee or their probation period, right? And then previous applicants, right? Other applicants that have previously applied to that company that they may be able to connect with. And so we never want to assume, obviously, that that they're going to completely rely on us in addition to all the other sources like our own competitors that we have. But we need to work fast, right? We always have to ask, who do they have internally, right? Who do they also have internally? That's part of the other influencing factors that affect the hiring process from a client's perspective. And we know, right, is companies have to move quickly if they hope to successfully compete for the most sought after talent, and especially in this market. And so we need to make sure that we're figuring out how do we quickly find candidates and find the quality. And some of the things that we also find, it's good just to kind of touch on some of these points, just to put it out there. If anything, for knowledge, maybe it comes in dialogue that you might have if you're somebody who's dealing directly with the client. But there are definitely pros and cons for the client looking at those, let's say those promotions or internal transfers, right? For the client, right, it's compelling. Why not? They don't have to pay a recruitment fee. It's simple, easy, cost effective. Very little need for induction or training, maybe a little bit of a refresher, right? Motivates the employees to work hard, and it increases that work relationship because they're working towards a promotion, and then can develop that employee loyalty. So there's lots of compelling reasons why the client's going to do that, which we need to, as recruiters, be aware of that, but not to go against that, right? We want to create positive working relationships with the companies, but some of the things that we do want to be aware of as a knowledge or an education piece, if the conversation arises, is there are also cons, right? So it prevents new hiring of potential resources, right? So it prevents bringing outside talent in, fresh perspective. It might have a limited scope because all the vacant positions cannot necessarily be filled. There could be issues with employees who are promoted and those who aren't. If an internal resource is promoted or transferred, then that position remains vacant, so it creates another opening, which of course maybe we could help fill. Employees who are not promoted could end up being unhappy and demotivated. So there's certainly pros and cons and a really strong understanding on why clients choose to do that. But when their resources fall short, then obviously we know where we can help provide additional support at the same time. And speaking of internal recruiters, when I started in the industry 17 years ago, like LinkedIn didn't exist. Internal recruiters, it was HR. It was easy to sell because HR is, busy with a million other things. Whereas internal recruiters now, many of them have come from our firms. So they are trained on Boolean and sourcing and headhunting and all those things. So our goal is not to go against the internal recruiters, right? We're there to support them. We're not there to replace them. And our clients, it's important that they also know that, right? We're not working against them. We need to work together and provide additional resources, but knowing the pros and cons is certainly a valuable thing to be aware of. Now, just to kind of give you a little bit of framework of how we're going to spend our time, we're going to look at 4 key areas within the recruitment process. And I put in their initial steps because if you guys are like my company, we've got all sorts of charts and diagrams and things about processes. And we know that there's way more than 4 steps in the recruitment process, and it's definitely not a linear process. So I'm focusing on today on just 4 kind of key areas, recognizing that there's obviously other variables that come into play. So let's take a look at the 4 key things that we're going to have some dialogue around. Number 1 will be the job order intake, right? Making sure that we understand the value of that. The sourcing and finding of candidates, right? Again, for some of you who've been in this industry for a long time, some of this might all be a really good refresher. Some new nuggets may be found as well. Interviewing and candidate selection. So going through that process, and then testing, checks, references, things around that. So number 1, we're going to talk about the job order intake. Now, I'd love to ask you guys by, again, throwing this into chat. What is your current job order intake process? Just like a quick one-liner, what is your job order intake process? Are you somebody, do you personally take the job order yourself when you receive a requisition from a client? Are you working with an account manager or somebody who does that? Just to kind of get a sense in terms of, for yourselves, who's doing that? Okay, so the account manager plus recruiter gets on the call with client. Beautiful. I think that's so important to have the recruiter and the account manager do it together for so many reasons. Let's give it a second here for people to type in what your current job order intake process looks like. Collect details of the staff request with the hiring manager. Our consultants work directly with our clients, no account manager. Okay. Any others? Okay. So let receive order via email, phone or in person, documented, request job description, take recruiter to job site when possible. Beautiful. Provide a signed rate quote and terms and conditions prior to dispatching candidates for review. Okay. So kind of a mixed blend actually of different processes, which is expected. We're all from different companies. Sometimes I work directly with the client and sometimes it's through our account manager. Okay. So you're sort of blended hybrid there. Okay. So let's talk about the job order. Andre, are you comfortable in reading this slide for us? Oh, on mute. Okay. I'll just read it in short. A well-qualified job provides a recruiter with greater opportunities to help fill a role. Part of taking a job order requires us to make sure we understand the job so we can find candidates who are a good match. Okay. So then then we can take that role to your candidates and ultimately fill the position. So I'd love to ask you guys, I got another here, BD manager gives the initial order. Okay, got it. Awesome. So what are some of the key things that we want to be keeping in mind, right, when we're taking a job order? What are some of the key things that we want to keep in mind when we're doing a job order intake that will help us identify the right candidates? And if people want to just come on and share directly live, by all means, please unmute and just come and share what are some of the key things that we want to keep in mind when getting a job order that will help us identify the right candidates?
Why is there a current staffing need?
Why is there a staffing need, right? What's the why? What else?
Yeah. What is the environment like, the corporate culture?
Okay, what's the culture? What's the environment? Very important for our candidates to understand and for us to understand, right? Are we sending our candidates to a safe workplace? What else?
Was the longevity in the company as well?
The longevity. So do you mean the turnover?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's the longevity, the turnover. It gives us a bit of a sense on what this could be like for our candidates so that we can be transparent with candidates too.
And of
what
course,
else?
if there is someone was in this role before,
right,
and
yeah.
why the order is open,
why it's open, how long has it been open? What else will help us find the right candidates? So in chat, I want you to type in on a, if you were to sort of look at it on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how often do you get the client on the phone, or do you get to meet them in person or video to actually do the job order? On what frequency are you doing a live job order as opposed to an email? Like, here's what we need, this is what we're looking for, da, da, da. Like, so how often are you having that live conversation? If you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, 10, always live, awesome. 10, 8, 1. Okay, 3, 10, 9. All right, so that's great. I'm seeing a lot of live, which is so important. Sometimes we are limited by how much time our clients are prepared to give and to provide. So I'm really happy to see that. I often get a mixed result there. So we also want to understand at times, we may need to educate the client. Throughout the whole recruiting process, actually, there's lots of areas where we need to educate the client so that we have good process control. But we want to also educate the client at times why we need more than, let's say, 5 minutes to do a job order. And I hear this often. Again, I do all the training for my company. And so I often hear from my colleagues that the client's only going to give me 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not necessarily going to cut it. So what do we need to do? We need to educate the client, right? Why 5 minutes in a job description isn't always enough. Now, I also recognize that we have a ton of temp recruiters here where sometimes it's like they don't have the time. They literally need somebody, they need them now. They put the trust in you. You've got the candidates. You need to make that connect. So there's going to be a varying degree of circumstances of what this is going to look like, and it's going to be independent on the particular situation. But typically speaking, a poorly qualified job are a major contributor to failure for recruitment consultants, right? Without it filling the job, it becomes much harder to have enough context. So some of the things that we want to be thinking about is, how do we educate the client? Of course, the value for us is that it's more likely to fill it. We can work with a targeted fashion, easier to sell an opportunity to candidates if we actually have something to sell to them, and then better predictor of the outcome, and then more likely money to be made for us. Client, right? Greater confidence, right? It gives them the confidence that we know what we're looking for, right? They're going to get better quality resumes, hands down, if we have a proper job order and we have some insight. And whether that takes 15 minutes for some individuals, whether it takes an hour and a half, depending on your desk and the role and what you're doing, right? Whatever that is required, they're going to, by default, get a better quality of resumes and candidates because we know a little bit more about what we're looking for, and we can target it and get it right the first time. Candidates are more prepared for the interview, right? When we prepare them to meet with a client, or we prepare them to show up on day one. And then for the candidate, there's so much value, right, to us. Again, more information about the job. It gives them a greater opportunity to say yes to the job, to say, no, not interested if we don't have enough information. Better understanding of the company, easier to say yes, as I said, quicker process, better job in shorter timescales. So the reasons to get as much of an in-depth job order as you can is so critical on so many fronts. And what do we need from a job order, right? So what do we need from a job order? And what happens? So again, you guys can come off mute just to ask that question, right? What happens if we don't get a proper job order? What are some of the things that can happen if we aren't properly getting a job order?
Don't get the proper match.
For sure, not getting the proper match. What else?
Time wasted. A lot of time is wasted.
Tons of time wasted, right?
Clients disappointed.
Clients disappointed. What else can happen?
I would say that sometimes the candidates can be disappointed as well because they're going to expect something and then it's not going to fit their expectation. Yeah,
right. It's not going to fit their expectation, right? We've oversold the opportunity. We undersold it. Right? There could be those, it could be like not at all what they expected after they've had the interview, or we send them for day one on the job if it's a temp assignment and they're like, this is nothing that I thought it would be, right? Because so there's so much that can go wrong if we don't properly get the information that we need. So the next question I want to ask, because we have a company information working, right? So we have a whole diverse group of people on this call. And like my organization, we have all sorts of different types of desks and partnerships and things. And so lots of things to contend with. But when we have a situation where maybe our role is 100% candidate fulfillment, so a recruiter or a 180 recruiter where we're doing that candidate fulfillment side, and we're not also in front of the client during that job order taking, what are some of the things that we may want to be thinking about that we can get from our account managers, right? What are some of the things? So we're going to look at that after. I just want to plant that seed, right? So, and that's something that I often hear. Well, if I'm the recruiter, I'm not asking some of the questions in the job order. What if my account manager doesn't get the right questions? What if the client's not willing to send them more information? What if it's a major requisition and 5 firms are working on it and you get what you get? So there's going to be lots of things that we want to be thinking about. How do we get more information? So we're going to take a look at what are the things that are important, right? What are parts of that process that's going to be important for us so that we can get a real sense of the skills and traits necessary. And so job content, what will the candidate be expected to do? Candidate profile, what is the client actually looking to hire and to engage, right? The company site information, what do we need to know about the client company or the job site? What about the location? Is it on a bus route, right? Is there parking? Right? Are they working remote? Are they working hybrid, right? Working environment, where are they working and what are the conditions like, right? What are the safety protocols? What are their current policies in place? Are they working again from home, hybrid, purely in the office, right? Pay and rewards, what salary and pay rate, right, is available? Urgency, how quickly do we need to find somebody? So we always want to ask ourselves on that urgency, whose urgency is it? Right? Is it the client's urgency, which is great if they have a high level of urgency, or is it our urgency because we just want to fill the job? If our urgency doesn't match the client's urgency, we're going to be kind of banging heads with the client. So whose urgency is it? And then the commitment, right? How committed is the client to us? Right? Are they going to communicate with us? Do they share information? Do they get back to us? Do they provide feedback? Are we chasing them all the time? Right? So these are the types of things that we want to try to work towards during the job order. I don't know about everybody. Every organization has own structures. I know, of course, in our company, we use very structured job order documents and for all different types of areas. And so that's one of the things that I think is super important if people aren't using a structured format to really be thinking about that. And so I'm going to ask that question in chat. Do you, I don't know if some of you are solo entrepreneurs or if you're all working part of a larger firm. I know some people on this call are from the same company. Just a simple yes or no. Do you currently use a structured job order form? Or are you doing what I did when I started, which was just lots of notes on like on a sheet of paper or typing it out somewhere? So what's your current process? Yes. So you are using a job order form, job order. Great. And there's no shame if you're not, right? Everybody has their own approach. Know what plans you right away, okay? Very structured in, okay, or that's awesome. Yes, through the ATS, a form. No, but using a CRM software. Okay, so some softwares do have that resources there for you. Okay. So, and whatever that might be, I know our software, again, you can put the template, you can put that template right into the software and just type away as you're talking to the client. But when that opportunity arises where we're seeing more clients in person, it would also be great to have something that we're, pen and paper kind of old fashioned way. So I'm glad to see that. I think it's super critical. I'm a very much a forms person because I don't like to make mistakes. Also, I do take that approach that as recruiters, we want to be ambassadors for the industry, right? So we don't want to, cut corners. We want to try to manage no surprises approach to what we do. And the more we use those structured forms, the less of a chance we're going to see issues arise. And other things just to point out about what we're thinking about in terms of a solid job order. I'm not going to share any job order forms with you today because, again, every desk is different. Every role is different. Every company is different with what you guys or what's important for what you do. But just things to be thinking about during that job order process and what we want to be looking for, right? The performance standards. What are the expectations? What are the client's KPIs or the metrics that they expect of this candidate? So we can match that to the candidate. Working policies, COVID protocols, hours, term length, start dates, information about the knowledge, skills, and other attributes. Where to locate the right candidates, right? Learning from the client. Where are these candidates hiding? What organization offers an income? How do we stretch the job order, right? So during the course of that job order, can we stretch it? If they say that the base salary is $55,000, can I bring you a candidate at 65? Yes or no? No, not 65. Well, what about 60? Yes, you could bring me a candidate at 60. Great, now I've expanded my candidate pool. We need 3 years experience. Well, what if I find you somebody that's super great, that has all the qualifications and they've only got 1 year out? No, we need 3 years. Well, what about 2 years? Yes, 2 years. Great. Again, I've expanded that base. So thinking about where are the areas that you could stretch that job order, right? What should why? Oh, that should say why should a candidate join the company? For what reason would they join your organization? What are the great things you guys offer? What do you do for the fun factor? What's your culture like? What do you guys do to keep people, retain people, attract people, right? What are the issues, challenges in the company? I don't know if a lot of you guys asked that question, but it's something that I always asked because I want my candidates going all eyes open, right? Full eyes open and understanding of what are they entering? What are they coming to so that there's no surprises? And then setting those search expectations, right? During that job order taking, for me, it was always very important to set the expectations of what the client can expect from me and what I expect from them. If I'm working with an account manager, it's good for us, of course, to have expectations of what I'm hoping the account manager can do to help me find candidates, and then what they can expect from me in terms of in return. Other things that I wanted to point out, if a lot of these points aren't covered and some of the other points that we discussed on the previous slide, so many things can happen. We're going to locate the wrong people. And like somebody said, waste a whole bunch of time, right? And time is money, that acronym TIM. So we don't want to be wasting time. We're not going to be able to present the opportunities to the candidates. We're going to get a lot of no's when maybe they would have been a yes, right? We may misrepresent the role, but more so from a ratios perspective, right? We're going to end up having lower fill ratios, and then we're going to have higher fall off ratios, and nobody wants a fall off. So it's so important how the job order is the first thing I talk about, because it's critical that we do a great job on that, because then the rest of it helps us with every piece of the process. But the question I was asking you guys before is, what if you don't have all the information, right, that you need? What do you do? How do you obtain the information? Right? If you've got that client, it's like, listen, you got 10 minutes and that's it. Or you have the client that's like, listen, I don't have any time at all. Here's the job description. Here's the salary. Here's the start date. And you're sort of now on your own. So what are the things that you can do? So I'd just like you guys to come on and share. What are the other sources of information that we can start figuring out a little bit more about the company, maybe about the job? What are some of the things that we can do? So somebody put in here LinkedIn. Okay, so whether you want to type it into chat or you want to come on live, and again, just open mic.
I think LinkedIn is probably one of the first sources that I will always go to check the company stats, how many employees, how long they've been in the business, the company website. Also, like, again, see the longevity of the employees over there. If there's currently someone in the role, how many people in this team. And of course, like in other sources externally, just to see the company revenue or reviews as well.
Definitely. Of course. Yeah, that's awesome. LinkedIn is a huge one. There's so much you can get from there. What else? What are other ways to get additional information that might help you? And number one, think about, okay, where am I going to find these people? What does that look like? What's the job potentially going to be? What's the company potentially going to be? What's the industry potentially going to be? Right? There's so much that we can do. We don't have to just rely on that job order because yes, we all have tons and tons of clients that say you got 5 minutes or I don't have any time, just use the job description. Okay, what else?
You can look up similar job descriptions on Indeed, and sometimes if I want to gain like extra understanding of the role as I'm recruiting, I sometimes ask candidates, like even ask candidates that might, sometimes they give me more information about the role so I have a better understanding.
Yeah, 100%, right? Google the job itself, Google other titles, similar roles. Yeah. Any other ideas?
I previously used the National Occupational Classification, the NOC, again, to get more details on certain jobs. And then of course, let's say we've worked with that client several times and placed other employees there, then it might be a good idea to speak with former or current employees that we placed that we can get some feedback on.
Yeah, right. So previous current employees, right? Candidates maybe we've interviewed who are there, maybe people we've placed there, for sure. Yes, I love that. What else? Well, I will show you. Okay, so this is just a small sampling, right? Of what's in your CRM already. So that's kind of what you were saying, right? Who are some people that maybe we've already placed there? What's the information, any intel, any insight? What are the past jobs that we've worked on? What are the past placements or maybe jobs that we didn't fill? What are some of those communications? What about asking our own colleagues when they've worked with those companies, if they've worked with those companies? Doing a Google search, right? Just simply Googling the company, right? What's in the news? What's happening? The movers and shakers area, going directly to the company website. What's on there? Checking out all their information. What industries do they serve? Do they have Meet the Team on there, right? Which, right, we always like to know about Meet the Teams. Glassdoor, right? What are some of the comments on Glassdoor about that organization? Candidate intel, right? So reaching out to candidates that we've already met or that we've interviewed, people we've placed there, people that maybe have worked there in the past that we know, LinkedIn, all sorts of other social media. You can check them out, maybe Facebook, maybe Twitter, I don't know, Instagram. Do they have information? Do they show stuff that gives you a flavor maybe for the company culture? And then of course the job description itself, and then looking online for other, similar types of job descriptions, looking at, what might be certain things that might be relevant. So even if we don't get all the information we're looking for, we can spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of research to get as much as we possibly can. But I always tell people, make sure you research with a time limit, because for every job that you might work on, if you're spending hours and hours and hours doing research, it's taking away from your ability to find the candidates too. So research, but with a time limit. So just in short, in looking at, to sort of summarize the section here, again, it's important that we make sure that we have all the information that we need at the beginning by spending a few minutes making sure we have the right information initially. We will save time in the long run. We will also be less likely to miss candidates or fail to get them committed to the job due to lack of information. So I've heard that so many times too, like, well, I don't have time to do a full job order. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have time to do a full job order? Number one, you're spending time with the client, so that's always a good thing. Number two, it's going to help you and your account and your recruiters and your team find the right kind of people. And it's going to ultimately help you time-wise to spend a little bit of time up front, do a little bit of the work up front, so then you're not chasing clients for information and making mistakes and going back to the drawing board. So I just shared this with as an example, right? If all else fails and you don't get a lot of information, this here is just some of the basics just to get you started on the sourcing, right? Just to get you going on finding candidates. If all else fails, right? What are the titles I need? And this might be something that if you're working with an account manager and you're wanting more information that the account manager can try to get, so you can figure out that sourcing plan and really think about where am I going to identify these individuals. These are just some of the basics that you could say, listen, this is some of the great stuff that we could, that would really help, right? So what are the titles? Alternate titles, one rung below, core industries, sub-industries, companies, direct competitors, indirect competitors, compensation, of course, and then the candidate, years of experience, education, skills, right? Bonus skills, right? What are the nice to haves? What are the must haves? Expertise, geographic parameters. So if all else fails, like this here should give you enough of a basis to get at least the ball rolling on sourcing. Any questions at this stage, or comments on just sort of that high level overview of the job order part before I move on? Okay, I'll move on. So let's move into step number 2, right? So we've got the job order, we're starting to figure out what we want, then we're looking at that sourcing and finding candidates. It may be counterintuitive to ask this question, but why do we need to source? Why do we need to source for new candidates? I know it's too obvious of a question, but why do we need to source for new candidates? So let's share. Let's, again, open mic. Why do we need to source for new candidates? And it may seem silly to even ask, but and the sourcing for new candidates, new is the operative word.
You want to anticipate future work orders and what you typically get as staffing requests, so you get those people with that right fit.
Okay, awesome. What else?
Keeps your database fresh as candidates find work. You're kind of keeping your database with more and more candidates.
Yeah. Okay, keeping the fresh database, right?
And having like to have enough employee to, well, enough like candidates to fill like a really urgent position or replacement, temporary replacement, stuff like that.
Yeah, right. You want to have a good amount of people in that funnel, right? You want to have, like, if you guys have talent matrices or whatever you may do, but you want to have enough people in that funnel, especially for those really time sensitive ones, which again, often temp and contract are super time sensitive. But even in perm, right? Listen, I'm flying into your city in 3 days from now to do some interviews. Who else do you have? And you're like scrambling, right? So it's that time sensitivity, that speed to market, that sense of urgency. And so the reason why I asked this question, even though it seems too obvious, is that so many consultants have stated, and I'm sure all of you and I myself over the years have found that we simply don't have time to truly prioritize sourcing. And so what we end up doing is working with the best of who we find the fastest. So we find the best of who we can find, or the best of who has applied, but we may not be finding the best of who's truly out there. So this can definitely work well, but what about when the client is pickier than you're used to? What about when you're looking for that purple squirrel, that needle in the haystack, that diamond in the rough, right? So maybe it works. Maybe you get job applicants and, like, luck be have it, you've got some great applicants. Right now, in today's environment, where it's becoming really competitive and really hard to find candidates, they're being contacted left, right, and center from all different sources, that sometimes that isn't going to be the best, right? So we want to make sure that even though they say they simply don't have time to prioritize sourcing, well, it's kind of what we need to do. And so that we're not just presenting the best of who's applied, right? It's our job, and what clients come to us for is to find the best of who's truly out there for them. So how can you, shave off parts of your day that can be used for higher impact tasks, right? Think about, are there things I can do to shave little parts of my day where maybe I can contribute 30 minutes a day to just proactive sourcing, right? Remember, the key is to get candidates in the door and out to clients fast. So we don't want to waste time on busy making stuff, right? How can you want to leave the day feeling that I've been productive, I found some net new people. So let's talk a little bit about that. I think I have a question in chat or a comment. Oh, also leads. Yes, for sure. Okay. So let's take a look at this. So sources of candidates, right? So building and maintaining a candidate database that evolves and becomes self-sustaining is the sum of recruiters' worth. I don't know if I necessarily would say it's the sum of our worth, but it's the sum of what we do, right? A strong, positive, and trusting relationship with your candidates will result in referrals and other marketable candidates. But prior to that, we want to take a look at a couple of questions around, so where do we find candidates, right? We've gotten the job order. We've got some knowledge of what the client may be looking for. We've got some hopefully knowledge of what they're not looking for, right? So what are you looking for? What are you not looking for? So we can target our efforts and focus. But it's also important to understand the selection criteria, right? So one is the recruitment. How do you find them? How do you screen them? How do you interview them? But then how do you select which ones actually get exposure to your client? So the selection criteria is intended to identify those job seekers who meet the minimum requirements in order to be considered an applicant. Preferred, desired, and or additional criteria may be established and used to further assess candidates and make the ultimate selection decision. So the selection criteria, again, is what are the things that we're doing? What's important? What are those nice to haves for the client? What are the must haves, right? If they give you a list of 10 things, can we bring 7 to 8 out of 10, right? We may not always get 10 out of 10. In fact, we probably won't. And if we're always waiting for that 10 out of 10, we're going to have a hard time bringing candidates fast. So is it, you know, that 7.5, maybe that's the comfort zone. Do they meet on that scale of 10? And every organization, whether you guys have a matrix, whether you have a scorecard, lots and lots of your clients will, if you're working with them and if they have an established HR department of any sort, they may very well be using things like scorecards. And this is just an example of what one could look like and how you may go ahead and measuring various candidates against the others. I'm just curious actually to ask that question in chat. Do you guys use some kind of scorecard like this when you're evaluating candidates? Do you use a scorecard that you kind of do a side-by-side comparison as you're determining which candidates get in front of the client? Some do and some don't. It's not that much of a common practice. No. Okay. What else? Anyone else? No.
We do as well, and we have a priority list of things that they must have and things that would be the other icing on the cake for the job. So yeah, we'd use a match sheet on the hard to tell ones.
Yes, right. And I know that in my time, I've also done some executive search where we would definitely use things like this. Some of those really hard to find, those purple squirrels. Sometimes we get lucky and we have too many candidates. Like how lucky would that be if we had too many good candidates, but the client's like, I just want 3. I just want 3. I don't want 10, I want 3. So how do you identify which 3? How do you make that decision? You might create some kind of scorecard to go, okay, let's look at it. And so the idea of the selection criteria is developed to guide recruitment decisions during that recruitment process, right? So the applicants are assessed on, on the extent to which they might meet the selection criteria that's been outlined between the client and yourself during that job order or your account manager, right, during that time. And so you might use an assessment, you might use this grid or matrix to help systematically compare the candidates' resumes and then makes your screening process a little bit more objective as well. And so just one idea. And if your company doesn't use it, or if you don't use it, you like the idea of it, you can just even Google, like, we're interviewing or candidate selection grids, you can find things or just come up with your own, right? This is just something that I just, that's just easy, simple. Now looking at on the sourcing topic, right? So we know that we need to, of course, source candidates. We need to proactively source candidates. We need to understand what's that selection. How are we going to decide, through our sourcing efforts? Number one, who do we want to establish contact with? Number two, who do we want to screen? Through that screening process, who do we want to interview? I understand for a lot of people, your screening call may lead directly to the interview at the same time. If not, who am I going to now ask back for an interview? Right? There's so many things that are coming into mind as we're going through that process. Again, because we don't want to waste our time, we don't want to waste the client's time, and we also don't want to waste the candidate's time. And so we want to take a look at what are some of the mistakes that recruiters might make? What are some of the sourcing mistakes that recruiters might make? So just again, come off mic and just share anything just kind of comes to mind. Don't overthink it. What are some of the sourcing mistakes that recruiters might make, right? And there's a treasure trove of so many tools and online sources at our disposal that one might think that sourcing candidates for a particular position is easier today than in prior decades. However, if you ask the veteran recruiters, the task of effectively sourcing candidates is actually really daunting. So despite, again, when I started 17 years ago, no LinkedIn, no Facebook, like it was not easy, no such thing as Boolean searching. Like literally it was pounding the phones day in, day out, every day, all day. But we were able to find candidates. I feel like I was able to find candidates a lot faster that way than I am now, despite all of the online resources. But because now we have that so much more competition that we're contending with. So what comes to mind when you think of some sourcing mistakes that recruiters might make? Anybody want to share anything that might come to mind?
I think sometimes it's just, again, for the recruiter not being able to understand the job requirement as well, which means that not sourcing the right resumes, or sometimes it can be a speed. For example, rushing to reach out to as many people as possible and like sending mass emails without really reading the resume up until the end, or not checking any notes, or candidates request in terms of their job search preferences.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
I think one of the biggest.
Oh, go ahead.
And well, I was going to say that one of the things that I've identified that my recruiters do is not getting enough information, and like saying, tell me about it. Say if they don't know a certain software, you know, they should say, tell me about it. You know, getting enough information is a key to making a good placement.
And so it's kind of like the that wheel of like open-ended questions, right? The who, what, when, where, why, tell me, explain, what else, right? Like going deeper and deeper and like peeling those layers of the onion. And I think a lot of
ask them if they've got a car, and sending them too far, like West End to the South Side, things like that. So you really have to put yourself into the applicant's resume and get the information you need to place a person. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Part of it anyway.
Someone else was going to say something?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I see is that we have recruiters who lack interviewing skills. So they don't ask the right questions, or they don't probe in a way that would allow you to know what to expect.
Right. So the recruiters are lacking the interview skills, right? So not sort of knowing kind of maybe how to dig a little bit deeper, which questions to ask, which questions to kind of, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that for sure, that could help. That could be challenging for sure. I don't know, Jennifer, maybe we'll have to do a training session one day for ACSESS on just interviewing. Could be an idea for the future. Okay, let's sort of share some of these sourcing examples here. So number one, I think somebody threw this into chat, assumptions. So making assumptions about the candidates you've never met. So what's wrong with this, right? What's wrong? When you approach a candidate with this attitude, you're assuming something about someone that you really don't know anything about, right? The truth is you have no idea what they're going to be like or what they're not going to be like. And then you potentially risk losing any possible trust that you may have otherwise have gone if you make assumptions on that candidate, right? We may just assume that just because they have this title, that they're doing all the same things that your other candidates have done, right? We don't want to make those assumptions. Another thing that, and it's a little bit different now, you know, again, we are in a really, really tight candidate market, but we also have more candidates on the market at the same time, because during these past couple of years, people have lost their roles due to the pandemic and other things. But recruiters typically, historically in the past, unless you're running a temp desk, where then you are working with people who aren't currently working, typically speaking. But we've often been trained over the years, especially on that permanent side, that, you know, we don't want to work with somebody if they're not working, right? We want to discount, you know, an active job seeker, right? Don't look at a person who's actively looking, only look at the passive ones. And many recruiters today still believe that only passive candidates are desirable. There's lots of pros to passive candidates and lots of cons at the same time. But what's wrong with this is that it really depends on the role that you're looking for, right? If you're hiring a personal assistant, or you're looking for a personal assistant for a medium-sized company, it might be a waste of effort and energy to only go after the passive candidate market, right? There's other types of candidates that are out there looking. Additionally, people may switch jobs so often in today's market. About every 4 to 6.5 years is common. It's actually, that was from a couple of years ago. It's actually more like 2 to 3 years is more common. So we don't want to undervalue or discount those individuals. Writing general job ads that don't weed out the weak matches, right? If you're writing job ads and you're posting them, which I'm sure the majority of us do, you don't want to make it so general, right? You want to also make it a little bit more specific so that it can try to weed out some of the weaker matches so that you're not spending all this time going through lots and lots and lots of resumes. And we know what that feels like when the resumes are piling up or your inbox is exploding because you've got too many resumes of unqualified candidates. So unless you set some kind of bar for the candidate to jump over, it is time consuming to go through thousands of resumes. Okay, turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit at least 7 out of 10. Now, every company, and I'm just going to say this a full disclaimer, right? I'm not going to kind of go against what your managers or your account managers or yourself, like what that sort of measuring stick is. But so many recruiters, and I've heard this over time, year after year, is I'm not finding those 10 out of 10s. Like, but how often are we finding the 10 out of 10? Sometimes they're out there, but a lot of recruiters are set on candidates having the exact everything 10 out of 10. And they might turn a blind eye to that 8 out of 10. So what if they miss 2 of the areas? Maybe, hopefully it's not the 2 of the most important areas. But what if there's a little bit of flexibility there? Maybe it comes back to that client education. Listen, we're going to do everything we can to find you that 10 out of 10, but at the end of the day, it's a crazy market. Are you okay if we bring you that 8 out of 10? They might just be missing a couple of areas. We'll be forthcoming with you and let know what those are. But if we're looking for that 10 out of 10, we're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of heartache. So we want to make sure that, that we're not just focusing there. But again, that's just my own best practice. Placing all of your faith in the well-written ad, right? So on the flip side, right? Now you've written a really great ad, but we don't want to just put all of our trust in that, right? We don't want to just do the post and pray. Our clients can do that, right? We don't want to just post and pray. There's so much more that goes into that sourcing. Where are we finding these people? What happens, right? So we need to, use that as one part, but there's so many other ways that we're going to be finding candidates. Right? I have no time to source, right? As I mentioned earlier, right? That comment, no time. But you have to make the time, right? We need to make that time. Whether you're a manager, you're an owner, you're a contributor yourself, we need to encourage that, but everybody has to make that time, right? Of course you have time to source. That's part of the job, is bringing new people forward. That's what companies pay us to do, right? They pay us to bring them new people that they can't otherwise find on their own. So whether you're, and if you're working on jobs, obviously you're needing to source, but trying not to only recycle the candidates that you have and find the best of what you found fast. Let's find the best of who's out there, plus the best of who you could find fast, right? So maybe doing a little bit of an upgrade in that particular pipeline. But I always say like 30 minutes a day keeps the bill collector away, whether you're doing proactive headhunting, whether you're sourcing for net new people, whatever that might look like. So I'd love to ask you guys to type into chat, do any of these resonate with you, right? Do any of these, and again, just out of curiosity, do any of these things resonate with you or people on your team or people that you're leading right now? Do some of these sort of be like, yeah, I could see that comes up, but that could be a mistake that might be good to sort of keep an eye on. Maybe just throw that into chat. You just have to type in the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on which ones may resonate if you want to. Okay, number 3, writing general job ads. Yep, so number 1, making assumptions.
Well, I think if you're running a specialty desk, that you have to keep the resumes coming in so you have somebody onboarding for you and bring you all the stars so you can get them out fast.
Absolutely.
One of my tips.
Absolutely. And I know for me, when I was running a sales and marketing desk, my focus was industrial sales. And then I wanted the creative stuff. So I also did marketing. So marketing and industrial sales, like 2 wildly different types of candidates. But I was so focused on, and then within marketing, I was doing a lot in the food packaging industry. So it was very, very specific. So constantly, like even if I didn't have a job, I'm just constantly filling that pipeline of those types of candidates so that I could respond quickly. So number 1, you're blocking time aside to source what you need for the jobs you have. Number 2, you're putting 30 minutes aside every day to keep filling that fresh pipeline. Okay, awesome. Oh, and then, and then one last one, not having a sourcing strategy in place, right? So not having that strategy in place, kind of just willy-nilly going about it, fly by the seat of your pants, hoping you find somebody, not having a structure, right? That could become a big mistake too, because it's very easy to get distracted by lots of other competing things that happen. And so with no strategy, it's going to just create chaos, right? It's okay to have organized chaos, but frenzied chaos is not fun, not easy to sustain. Just to kind of just briefly touch on this page, it can't be said enough that obviously there's so many factors that you want to be thinking about before you source, before you pick up the phone, just things that we want to be keeping about, right? There's no excuse to discriminate. We always have to do what's the right thing, what's within the law, right? So what are the legal requirements, right? The BFOR. Does anybody know what BFOR stands for? Whether you type it in chat or say it out loud, what's BFOR? Anyone?
I haven't heard of it. I think of
Bonafide occupational requirement.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So the legal requirements, what's the bona fide occupational requirements we need to be aware of, right? What's within the Human Rights Code? We're going to kind of touch on that later. But if you haven't already, we have another session with on business ethics where that's a little bit more explored and I think legal. Client urgency, importance to fill the position, which we've talked about. Again, whose urgency is it? Is it our urgency because we want to make a placement, or our bosses are saying you need to get something on the board, or is it the client's urgency? If it's not the client's urgency, you're just going to be wasting a lot of time until the client's actually ready to make a decision, right? Clients' in-house recruitment expertise, which we've talked about. What's on the Employment Standards Act? Employment equity and proportional representation, thinking about equity, role complexity and nature of the work, right? So what is the complexity? What's the nature of the work? And then of course, the availability of that candidate pool, right? So we're thinking about these factors before you begin that sourcing. What's the supply? What's the demand? Right now, there's a high demand and there's a low supply, or the supply that's getting scooped up very, very quickly. Just some sourcing for headhunting, right? So just a variety of different sources. I'm sure most of you guys would already know all of this, but just again, just a great reminder that there's so much more that goes beyond what's in our CRM systems, our ATS systems, as powerful as they are and as great as they are. But what goes beyond that? What goes beyond LinkedIn? Right? Are you just using LinkedIn? Are you sending a bunch of in-mail through Recruiter LinkedIn only, which may work for some people, but not necessarily. I know as an experiment, I sent out 40 messages last week for a role that I'm searching for in Toronto, and I had one response. So that was an example of it's so difficult. So there's so many other ways we need to get creative, right? What are all of the online sources, right? LinkedIn Talent Insight, Recruiter, Twitter, right? Maybe you're searching, you search followers of companies, post, share, connect, right? Getting involved in the conversation. Facebook, Instagram, post, like, connect, share, right? Again, getting exposure to who you are and getting involved in that. And if any of these things, there's so many things you can Google, how to source candidates on Twitter, how to source on Facebook. I mean, there's tons of ways to source in all of these platforms. Google, X-ray search, Boolean search, right? If you're not familiar with that, lots of Google stuff out there, watch a video on it. Staff directories, right? What's on the Meet Our Team, staff directories, trade shows, member directories, right? Association websites, Zoom info, and beyond. There's GitHub, Stack, Stack, I think it's called. There's a whole bunch of different ones that are specific as well for different industries. And then just examples, right? Some people say, well, where else can I get creative and post a job ad, right? Again, it depends on your company's policies, depends on budget and all that kind of stuff. But you can post an ad, a free ad on Facebook. There's ways to do that. And in groups, right? You can find groups on Facebook and post a little shout out in there. Some people post ads on Kijiji, depending on the job, of course, LinkedIn. There's some association websites, you can search them. Often there is a fee to post on an association website, but I know I've done that in the past. I posted ads with the universities. I've reached out to university professors, college teachers, professors, and get them to send some stuff out if I'm looking for a new grad. Post ads on niche job boards and then industry websites and all sorts of things. So lots of different ways. And of course, there's Indeed and Monster and Zip and all of that other stuff, but those are more of the obvious. So lots of other ways that we can try getting candidates to headhunt and then getting people coming to us as well. So just having to think a little bit outside the box. Anything else here that if you guys sort of were to look at this list and go, in addition to your CRM and all of these other things, are there other things that come to mind that could be beneficial in looking for candidates or getting candidates coming to you?
community sources. For example, specific languages like newspaper or groups on social media. That's what's helpful for me sometimes.
Definitely. Yeah. Right. So I'll have to add that on here as an example. WhatsApp groups. Okay. Remember all these. I got radio ads, WhatsApp groups.
Referrals from candidates.
Which one?
Referrals from candidates as well.
Definitely referrals. Okay. Telegram groups. I'm not familiar with that. Okay. Awesome. So newspaper ads, I mean, they're so expensive, and we do it for sure if we're doing an executive search, but they're so expensive to do those. Okay. So lots of things to be thinking about on how. Now, what's the number one resource to get new names? It's referrals, right? The number one. So whoever you just said referrals, that is your number one source, right? Is to get new names, is referrals, right? Of course, there's the ATS and there's LinkedIn, but getting referrals coming from candidates, clients, other consultants, referrals are your single most valuable source for new candidates. Why? Because you come to the new relationship pre-approved by somebody that they may know and trust, right? So building your referral base will obviously take time. It requires that you establish rapport, that you build trust, but it also requires you to remember to ask the question. And so many people I've trained are like, oh, I always forget to ask the question, right? When I'm interviewing them, who else do you know that may be open for change, right? Who else do you admire in your industry? Who else did you work closely with on that assignment? Who did you temp with? Who was part of that project? Who was the lead on that team? Who did you report to? Who reported to you, right? And what's that org structure? What's that family tree look like? There's so many things you can ask to obtain referrals during a reference check, right? So reaching out to those professors at the universities, representatives, right? I've reached out to representatives of industry associations and said, listen, you're the person that has the network, right? I work on stroking their ego and say, you're the one that knows the industry better than I do. This is what I'm looking for. Where can you direct me to, right? Contacting past placements for referrals, past candidates, anyone you've ever spoken with, doing those reference checks. Right? Can you do a reference check? Can you flip that to a headhunt call, right? Depending on who that person is and what their title is, and right, can you turn that into a headhunt call, right? We've often heard of flipping a reference check to a business development call, but that could also become a headhunt. And then during that candidate interview, right, there's so many things that we can be obtaining during that candidate interview, right? Like I said, who do you report to? Who's outstanding in your field? Where do you fit in that family tree, right? So lots of things that you can be thinking about. But that is like that number one source that most often gets forgotten because we're so tied to technology. We're so tied to what's online, what's in our systems, what sort of that artificial intelligence that we forget to go back to old school recruiting, which is picking up the phone or reaching out to somebody and asking, who do you know? That's going to reap the fastest results. Typically speaking, it should, as long as those people are picking up the phone and responding to your emails. The last thing that I just wanted to mention on here is the passive candidate sourcing. So that ties back to getting referrals, right? Once you've got that referral, you make a headhunt call. You're finding all those names, you make a headhunt call. You're reaching out to them. But you want to make that passive sourcing, again, a daily activity. Right? So you're looking for candidates who are actively applying to your jobs, they're actively in your ATS systems, but you're also looking for that passive market. Not everybody, not every desk, not every company does that, right? Where that's part of their process. But if it is, right, just remembering, make it a daily habit. You want to flex those headhunting muscles and keep that a part of your everyday practice. The best way is through picking up the phone and reaching people. Oh, I am sorry there. My team's decided to go off there. So some of the things to be thinking about though, and we're not going today into scripts and how do you make that passive headhunt call? That's not really part of the training. We're not sharing scripts from that perspective. It's more of a reminder, right? So you want, and a good thing to be thinking about is How do I make it daily? How do I track it? This will become your sanity saver. Like somebody said, especially if you're doing a specialized desk, or you're, let's say you're an IT contract recruiter and you're always looking for this type of IT candidate and they're impossible to find, but I found somebody, I'm going to call them passively. I don't have a job for them, but I'm still going to cold call them, right? So track that, right? To start understanding, how do you measure? Are you making those activities, right? What are the number of headhunts per day that you are doing? How many return calls do you get? Number of people that are open to considering your opportunities. How many actually give you a referral, right? If it's appropriate to ask for a referral. And now track that same metric for referrals, right? So tracking how many headhunts you're doing, right? How many new candidates are you reaching out to every day? And then track that for asking for referrals, right? How many, do the metrics, number of referrals per day, percentage of referrals that call you back, number of people, referrals that are open to opportunity, right? And what you'll discover is that when you start working that referred list, right, it is 3 to 5 times more productive than working off of the cold list. So making a warm headhunt call from a referral is hands down going to reap good results. Any questions at this time, or anecdotes or comments? Okay, let's keep going. So step number 3, and then at some point in this step, we're going to pause for a quick break, but we will get there momentarily. So step number 3, right? So you know the job order, the criteria, you've decided what the selection criteria is, you've figured out where you're going to source candidates, you're figuring out how I'm going to reach them, who are they, all of that good stuff. Now we want to think about that screening and that interviewing, right? So that screening and that interviewing process. And let's hop into that. Can I ask, I'll just read it actually. Good recruiters qualify the candidates they meet in advance of presenting jobs to them by making sure that candidates have the skills and capabilities required and the right motivations. They can speak to the right candidate about the right positions. Now, what I'd like to know from you guys, and again, we'll just do open mic on this one, is everyone has a little bit of a different process. Now, I know that sometimes if you're running a temp desk, you might do what you might think is going to be a quick phone screen, like a 10-minute phone screen. And then it ends up being more of like a 20, 25-minute conversation, right? The candidate gives you that time. So suddenly what you thought may have just been a quick kind of update call could actually turn into a bit of an interview. Sometimes the candidate says, I've only got 5 minutes. You're like, great, when can I call you back? Sometimes they give you 10 minutes, but it warrants another step. So there's different kind of approaches, whether the interview happens at the same time as the screen or they're a separate event. I'm just more out of curiosity, so I could speak to it. Can you guys share what is sort of your typical approach? Is it typical the screen and the interview is blended into one, or are they 2 separate events? You could just type it into chat actually. So is it 1 event or is it often 2 events? If that makes sense. Okay, so separate. So you're doing the screen and then the interview. Separate, 2 events. Okay. Right, okay. Could be separate or together depending on the job, telephone pre-screen followed by in-person interview, often 2. Okay, great. Okay, so it seems like there's a general consensus that it's two parts. That's great because that's sort of geared towards the way that I've got the training set up as well. And so if you were kind of to look at an analogy here, right? Imagine that you're looking to buy a nice, a secondhand car, right? You want a used car. Would you just look on the internet and then plan to test drive it? Or would you ask questions, right? You want to know about the age, the mileage, the condition, the number of owners it's had, the accident history, right? Anyone who doesn't pre-screen when buying a car runs the risk of wasting your time and your money. So it's that same concept, right? Not to sort of equate a candidate as a used car by any means, but when you're looking at that, you're asking, right? You're not just going to say, oh, that car looks nice, and now I'm going to go pick it up and drive it off and drive off the driveway. You're going to ask questions. You want to make sure you know all of these things so that you're properly matching your needs with a vehicle and what that car provides. So unless you enjoy working day and night to hit your targets, you'll need to work efficiently. And how? One way is this pre-screen, right? The pre-screen, those candidates that are actively seeking new jobs prior to committing to an in-person interview. Now, I often hear, well, I screened this person on what a waste of an interview. What took place in that screening call? What kind of questions? What was the quality of the screening? Why are all of your interviews a waste of your time? Right? You want to make sure that you use that screening process so that you don't waste time. And especially if you're spending 30, 40, 60 minutes with a candidate, that's a lot of time if they've been a waste of time. So and that's going to happen. You can have the best phone screen and still book them for an interview and it still be a waste of time. And I personally don't think any interview is actually ever a waste, because there's always so much good you can learn no matter what, whether you can place that candidate or not. But you want to, again, make sure that you are spending your time wisely. So there's 3 key things that we want to be asking ourselves during the screening to identify, do I want to invite them for an interview? Is this candidate a star? Right? Are they going to be a good candidate? Are they placeable? Right? Are they a good candidate? Are they placeable for jobs I have now, or the types of jobs that I have? Right? Will I waste my time, right, in the long run? What opportunities do I have that this candidate might fit? So these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about as we're going through that screening process. Because again, we don't want to spend a lot of time if it's not going to reap good outcomes or the ideal outcomes. So using that screening. And that's one of the first things I would coach people on when they come to me. I'm like, Jill, I keep striking out. I keep booking interviews. Number one, I'm getting a lot of no-shows. I'm getting candidates that don't show up for the interview, or they cancel last minute, and then I rebook them and I cancel, then I rebook them and then they cancel again. I'm like 2 strikes normally, and then they're out. But if you're not spending that appropriate time, then we all know that we're going to end up not sort of in the ideal outcome. So the calls can typically be minimum 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on the skill and the experience level. And just some basic questions, right, that we're wanting to be thinking about. And again, for some of you who maybe you're coaching others on your team, you're mentoring, you're working closely with recruiters, you're a manager, an owner, just some things that we might be thinking about on helping them properly screen so then they could properly interview, right? Why did you send your resume into a specific job posting? What is motivating your decision to leave your current job? Are you currently working? Describe a typical day. What are your key achievements? What are you earning now? What level of compensation is important? Describe in detail what you'll be doing in your ideal role. What would your reference say about you? What would others say about you? How much experience do you have with .NET or whatever that experience might be? Under what circumstances would you stay where you are? That's my number one favorite question for any candidate, for the ones that are currently working. Under what circumstance would you stay where you are? I'm trying to understand and mitigate counter offer or offer turn down. Who do you report to geographically? Where would you like to work? What 3 companies would you like to work for and why? Have you already applied to those companies? So lots of things that are kind of happening during that screening process. So I'm going to ask this question again, like the job order. Again, I'm a forms person. I'm like a huge believer on structure and forms. So what is the format you use? Do you have an organized screening document that you would utilize as you're calling candidates to screen them? Just a simple yes or no in chat. Do you use a screening document? Yes. So it's a formal, it's got a structure, it's got a flow. And again, if you don't, no problem. Not everybody does. So yes, you've got a format. No, yes, no. Okay, so a blend there. So structured document. Okay, excellent. So my strong recommendation for any type of call where it's important to get important information, whether it's a job order, it's a screening call, it's the interview, right? It's the interview prep, it's the interview debrief, all those things. The more documents you have, the greater chance you're going to forget. You won't forget to ask the important questions. So this is one example where screening, you might think about a more of a formalized approach by creating some kind, it could just be like a scaled back version of what your actual job or your interview form is. And there's so many options in front of you for screening and assessing, right? There's lots of things that we typically use, but we need to screen them, right? And we're screening them to reduce candidate pool to a manageable number. Is the candidate a star? Again, will I waste my time? Like I said, what opportunities? And then match to see if they meet the criteria on a current role. So many reasons why you want to screen a candidate and not just say, oh, that resume looks great and I'm going to send it off to the client. That to me would not be considered a best practice. If someone's like, oh, this is a great resume and I'm just going to send it to the company. How many times have we heard that, right? The client's like, I don't know why this firm or one of your competitors, or hopefully not one of your colleagues, sent a resume. There was like nothing that was even remotely close, like totally missed the mark. So it's critical that we're having that screen and not just sending resumes to clients without going through this process. And then there's a variety of different kinds of assessment tools, obviously, that we're using, right? So what's on the resume? Do you have an application form? I know sometimes we utilize candidate assessment forms. Any pre-interview questionnaires that you might send them, the telephone screen, the interview, any web-based information. Again, when I was doing a lot of marketing recruiting, a lot of my candidates had an online portfolio, or they had their own website or their own blog. So I would take a look at some of that stuff. Any brands that they created, I would go and check out those brands. Reading and scoring by a matrix or rubric, right? Any electronic scoring as well. So keywords, applicant tracking, there's all variety of things that we all utilize, but just so many things that can help us in that particular assessment process. And then when we're receiving the resumes, right? Obviously we're receiving the resumes. And one of the things that's important for you guys to remember is that the minute you work with a client, right? The minute you do work for a client, you become liable, right? So the minute you accept a search, the minute that you start sourcing and bringing candidates to them, you become liable. You are now an extension of them. So once you make that decision to work with them, you should also set expectations with them. So everything from your turnaround times, both for resume review, interview feedback, to whether or not you're going to have access to their internal systems, right? I know sometimes we've had access to that, or I've heard of other people that do, or at least a listing of rejected candidates, so you're not duplicating efforts. So you do become that extension, right, as your third-party consultant to them. So one of the things, obviously, is that we want to make sure that we're taking a real look at what's on the resumes, right? What's on those cover letters? It's the first step, as we know. It's pretty basic. That the resume is the first thing, right? That reviewing that is that first step. But in the process, there's so many things that we want to be thinking about at the same time. While reviewing the resumes, you want to keep in point, right? Obviously, the reason for the job change, and really understanding that. And if we don't really dig and learn, like, so why did you leave your last job? What would your references say? Who was your reference from there? What was the circumstances, right? If they were let go, especially, like, what happened? Why? How long has it been since you've been working? Did they replace you? It's important to know these things because we've all been there. If we don't ask those questions, we all know our clients will, and they'll find things out, and then it makes us look bad if we haven't asked the questions ourselves, right? What about the longevity? Have you seen that they've gone from a year to year to year? Okay, why? Why did they leave? Did they quit? Were they promoted? Was it a new role? Did they get fired? Or maybe it just doesn't say it on their resume that they were contract roles. So it goes back to that assumption, never make assumptions. I always check it out. And again, I was trained early on, until I got trained properly, was to say, oh, they've got, they moved around too much. Nah, don't bother with them. They're a job hopper. Well, you need to explore that, right? So whether there's a long gap in employment, well, what did that mean? Oh, they went back and did their MBA for 2 years. Got it. Okay, that's explainable. So I don't want to rule a potentially good candidate out because of that. Hopefully it says it on their resume. If it doesn't, I would coach them to. But the job hopping, right? So understanding, what does that mean? Lack of career progression, right? These are things I might want to be asking about in my screening. Missing dates, right? If it's not showing education, if required, or if they just say they've got their education, University of Manitoba, but it doesn't say if they've actually completed the degree, you might need to explore that. I've had my hands slapped a couple of times by making that assumption that, well, it says that they did a Bachelor of Commerce, but then when we do an education verification, they actually didn't complete it. They only did 1 year of it. So these are the kinds of things that if we don't pick up on that, we don't screen and ask, our clients will, they're going to be upset because we misrepresented the candidate. And then, of course, always operating with the highest level of integrity, because we do not want to be having, under any circumstance, discriminating with our candidates, right? We need to make sure that we're abiding by all of those rules and really finding the candidates who are going to fit the bill based on the client's criteria. Last slide before we take a break here, in addition to receiving resumes. So identifying red flags, right? One of the things, so those are sort of a list of things to be aware of and picking out some of the red flags, but resumes are by design. It's a personal document where candidates have free rein to describe their skills and experience, right? It can lead to ambiguity and potential issues that need to be clarified further. So I want to ask you guys just to come offline, right? Again, sort of open mic on just sharing what could be examples of a red flag, whether it's on a resume, something you picked up during the phone screen, whether it's through the interview, but what could be a red flag that doesn't necessarily mean we rule them out, but it requires further exploration. What are some examples of potential red flags that we want to be aware of that if we don't pick up on it, our clients will?
For me, it's several job changes within a short period of time.
Okay, so job changes, right? So the why was a contract, right? What happened? Okay, and there was another person who said something.
Well, in my case, I look for long periods of unemployment. Why were they unemployed? 4 years, 5 years, something like that.
Right, right. So what was that reason? Okay.
But what was the reason? There could be a whole lot of things in there, especially if they're a male that that does not go through the childbearing stages. But when you're looking at somebody who's been off for a long time, were they traveling the world? What were they doing?
Right. Right. So for example, I had a gap in my resume because I did just that like a long time ago, but I did that. I quit a job that I absolutely loved, went traveling for a year, right? So there was that gap. And I remember when I was being interviewed, they were like grilling me on the gap. And I'm like, I was traveling for a year. So if we don't address that, our clients will pick on it. Sorry?
Traveling is education. So if they're doing that, well, they're coming back enlightened.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Definitely. Okay, what else? Someone said gaps in resume. What other things are we wanting to pick up as potential red flags? Has anybody ever taken a resume and then cross-referenced it with LinkedIn?
That's what I just wanted to say. Yeah, exactly the same. I recently had the same experience and the candidate couldn't really give me any explanation. And another case was with a recruiter who had multiple LinkedIn profiles in the same resume in our system, but neither the dates, neither the full name of the employers really didn't match. So I had to ask for the references.
Yes. Right. And I just had that experience actually too, interviewing somebody. Maybe it was the same person, right? Interviewing, and it's like, these dates don't match. Like, I don't understand. Like the dates.
I got the reason. The candidate told me I lost my wallet. I'm like, no one is creating LinkedIn using your wallet.
That's awesome. What are some other red flags?
I think also we have sometimes a situation where they list a whole lot of degrees that come from universities that are questionable.
Okay, so validating, right? If the university is valid, right? If it's a valid program or degree, and we've actually done that internally here. I remember years ago, somebody had put the name of an institution that was, not from within Canada, and once we did some research, it actually wasn't even real, right? So we always do education verifications. Yeah, that's a great example. What other kind of red flags do we might identify? So gaps, job hopping, the academics.
I guess how they refer about their employers. When you ask them about the reasons as to why they left, or just hearing about their perceptions of their employers. Sometimes they just go on and on about talking bad about them. So that is a red flag for me.
Yeah, right. And that one's an interesting one, right? Because I've certainly had my fair share of candidates too, right? That are like this kind of, they sort of, as recruiters, we're wearing so many hats, right? We're sourcers, we're marketing people, we're creative writers, we're resume writers, we're all of these things, we're salespeople, we're sourcers, all of that stuff, but we're also sometimes have that therapy hat on where the candidate just needs somewhere to vent. So sometimes in that example, they're venting and it's like, okay, I'm a good, safe place for you to vent to, but sometimes they're just being really like, you're like, oh, I don't know if I could put them in front of my client without worrying about them totally bad-mouthing their company, because we know that nobody likes that. So sometimes it's understanding, are they just venting, but I'm a safe place for them to vent to, or are they really going to be like that in an interview in front of the client? So that's a good example. So lots of things, right? Things that we want to be thinking about. And guys, this is even before we've like even necessarily picked up that phone, right? When you're identifying that red flag from the resume. And then of course, when you got them live. So it's 1:30 my time. It's a break time. It's kind of a good spot to have a break. We'll take a 10-minute break. So whatever time zone you're in, come back at 1:45, 12:45, 2:45, and I will see you guys in 10 minutes, and then we will carry on. Welcome back, everyone. If you have returned to the session, can you please just type a note in chat just that says here, so I know that the majority of you have returned. We've got about another minute, but just to see who is there. Okay, good. Welcome back, everybody. I appreciate everybody's promptness. So we will move to the continue on. And so we are looking now at finding the most qualified candidates, which has been part and parcel to what we've already been discussing today. And looking at some of the things that we want to consider when we're determining that quote unquote perfect candidate, or maybe a better way of saying is the ideal candidate, because we're not always going to find the perfect one. We're going to find those who are pretty darn close, but not always the perfect one. So what are we looking at when we find the ideal candidate? So we want to take a look at what are some of the different factors that are going to contribute to this identification process. So there's a variety of things, but skills. Number one, can they do the job? Right? This is the bare bones minimum. Can they do the job? If they don't have the skills, we're not even talking, right? So they have the bare technical skills or the education that's required, the certifications, they've done the same kind of responsibilities or tasks. So that's obviously goes without saying. And we find that, right, as we uncover that through what's on the what's in their candidate application, what's in the interview content that we've gone through. But another interesting part of it is the capability. So it's one thing to have the skills, but what about the capability? So what the capability is how well can they do the job? And this is the area that helps you distinguish between they've got all the skills, but now which ones? Let's say you've got 10 candidates, same skill set, same criteria, but of those 10, which ones has the highest level of capabilities, right? It's not enough to say, yes, check, check, check. They have all of these things. Great. They have all of them, but are they good at it? How good are they at those things? That's where we uncover the capabilities. That's where we're asking, really in-depth types of questions to distinguish how does candidate A differ from candidate B if the resumes look identical. Those are typically the things that you don't necessarily see on a resume, unless they've highlighted accomplishments, achievements, projects that they've led, outcomes, if they do some of that stuff. But this really has to come through that phone or in-person or some video conversation. And then another key factor is the motivation. Why do they want a new role? Why do they want the new role? So I'd like to ask you guys, throw into chat, if you were to take a look at these key areas, these three skills, capabilities, and motivation, which one do you think is the most important? If you were to look at all three, which one do you feel is the most important? If you were to just select one. Okay, I see one comes up, motivation, skills, how well they can do the job, motivation, capabilities, motivation. Okay, so let's see what it says here. So assessing the candidates, and we'll talk about each area, and then we'll see if, we'll see what your thoughts are there. So skills, often clients are seeking to employ skilled individuals who will already know how to do the job required. This skills list that a client might have can then be used to find and assess potential candidates. This is the most basic of assessments, as it can be relatively binary. Do they or do they not have the right skills, right? So this is just, they have the skills. They either have the skills or they don't have the skills. Capabilities. The capabilities is the assessment to make sure that candidates we work with have the right depth of experience. How good are they at their job with those skills? Some of this is contextual, the environment they work in and the opportunities they have to practice their skills. Motivation. This is the most important assessment. It is often the reason why what appears to be a perfect candidate backs out of a process or turns down a job. Getting good at this will put you at a significant advantage over your competitors and save you a lot of time, as more of your candidates will want the jobs that they look at through you. So they can have all the skills, which is the bare bones. They can have all the capabilities and be the best candidate out there. But if they're not motivated, if they don't have a willingness, if they don't have a desire, if they're like, you know what, I'm not sure. Our job isn't to stick a square peg into a round hole, because they're typically, it's not going to work. Right? They might fall off, it might be a fall off, or it just may not end up being a good situation. They go for the interview, they waste their time, they come back and like, yeah, still not interested. So if they don't have that motivation, it's really hard to place that individual in that particular role or any role. If it's just a generic, like, yeah, I might be looking, but I'm not really looking, right? So that becomes really important, especially with those passive job seekers as well. So again, based on the motivation, what are some valid career wounds or motivations that a candidate may have, right? And so we want to think about beyond money, right? We want, in some circumstances, money may be the factor, that just may be, but typically speaking, we want candidates, no matter if they're temp, perm, contract, we want them to be motivated by something more than money. Ideally, again, there's going to be some circumstances where money talks, but ideally we want to have things that go beyond that. So what are some examples, if you guys can come online and just share, what are some examples of motivations and what we call, or in our company, we call them career wounds or motivations on why a candidate would look at an opportunity, whether they're working or not working. What are some examples?
Growth would be one.
Come to mind. Sorry?
Growth.
Yeah,
So
okay, so growth, right? What else?
I also have like corporate culture. Sometimes the candidate might be unhappy with the way that the corporate culture is in their organization and they're looking for something different.
Yeah, okay. Growth, culture. What else?
Well, a love for that area, like, wants to be with that group, that the desire to be with a certain group.
Okay, the desire to be with a certain group. Somebody says where they want to live, expanding the family, right? Challenging job. Go ahead.
No, benefits. Company benefits.
Definitely, benefits. Right?
There's some people that nowadays just want to work from home and maybe their organization doesn't allow that opportunity.
Yes, 100%, right? This has become a new-ish type of wound that we didn't necessarily have 2 years ago. We weren't necessarily asking that question. Do you want to work remote? Do you want to work from home? In many cases, it was, you're working from the office, right? In the majority of cases. So now it's like the opposite. Well, my company only wants us to be remote and that just doesn't work for me. I want to be in the office, or vice versa, right? So that's a new set of career wounds that somebody might be having a reason for change. Okay, what are some other examples of career wounds? Flexibility, wants to make a difference in people's lives, right? Maybe they're just not feeling that they're motivated by their work, extra days off, pension, works of hour, or hours of work. Okay, any other kind of wounds that come to mind?
Wants to be his own boss.
Yeah, maybe they just want to be their own boss now, right? They're tired of reporting to somebody. Right? So there's so many reasons, like it's a huge list. But when I often ask people like, why would a candidate make a move? They say, well, money, like they kind of don't go like really depth. The key with this is that when we're trying to uncover from a candidate why, it's the why, right? Are you interested in making a change today? Yeah, I'm interested in looking. Excellent. Can I ask why? Well, I want to work closer to home. Okay, well, what's your current commute? What kind of commute is reasonable? How far is too far? Does your company know that you want to work closer to home? Is there some opportunity that your company will create flexibility for you to work some days from home, some days in the office, right? We're trying to figure out, are they going to accept a counteroffer as well, right? So what are those things? How do we dig deep to validate those wounds? Because if a candidate isn't motivated, it's going to be really hard to place them at that given time. There's other additional factors that we're thinking about. So in addition to skills, capabilities, and motivation, other things that we're factoring, right? Character traits, right? What are the character traits? Their personality, right? Are they an introvert, extrovert? Are they a proactive person, reactive person? How does that fit with your client, right? What about sort of that personality and the overall culture that works best for them? You know what, I really don't want to work in a closed door environment. I really prefer to be in an open door policy, right? Okay, fair enough, right? And then the fit overall, right? That overall fit. So does the candidate fit the job? And does the candidate fit the client? And vice versa, right? So we want to make sure, what does that overall fit actually look like? And this is what might separate you from others, right? This is one of the most important components, is to really figure out, your job is to find where your candidate is going to excel the most. And we don't want to make an assumption, right? We never want to make an assumption, right? We always want to make sure that the person it's the right job for the person and it's the right company for the person. At the end of the day, your candidate, it's your candidate's life that you're changing, that you're helping them change and improve or enhance. But does this fit at the end of the day? And so we might make an assumption, right, on somebody. We might assume that they want to work in an office and be working closely to the team. We might assume, oh, well, it's Google. You must want to work there. Who wouldn't want to work at Google, right? We might make that assumption. Well, maybe they just rather work in a small mom and pop environment where they feel like they're part of the team and contributing directly to the bottom line, right? Maybe they don't want to be in a huge organization. So does that person actually fit the organization? And does the person also fit the job? Are we making an assumption because they've always done one thing that they want to continue to always be doing the same thing? So we want to make sure that when we look at that overall fit, right, about the person fit in the organization, when the values and interests of a candidate match the organizational culture, that's one thing. And then when the skills of the candidate match the job requirements, that's another thing. So it's really making sure that we look at these things so that we can reduce turnover. We want to try to match the organization's business culture and value to what your candidate values. But if there's a poor candidate organization fit, obviously it increases the chance of the candidate leaving, whether on their own or client letting them go. So when working with an applicant, it's important to understand their values. It is important to understand their views on work in addition to their qualifications and their skills. As well, we all again sort of want to help mitigate that overall fall off by doing these things. So making sure that communication is key and always asking candidates and clients a lot of the questions to overall assess that fit. Then, of course, through that screening, right, we've decided, okay, we need to move from the screen. Most of you do that two-part process. You do the screen, you've identified, is this the right kind of direction? Let's book that interview, right? So your ability to identify and screen candidates is part of that service, but there's a surprisingly large number of recruiters who fail to interview their candidates properly. Getting good at this will create genuine opportunities to stand out from your competitors. We're not going to go today into like the full depth of that interview as well. This is just more of a sort of some areas of exploration. But then different types of interview styles. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you wanted to come offline or turn off your mutes and sort of round table again, why did I put this picture of a pinball machine? What does this picture convey as it relates to interview styles?
Besides, I love this because this is sometimes what I use about how the mind works too. In other words, it's kind of like the ball in the pinball machine bouncing all over the place, and who knows where it's going. Totally unstructured. Totally unstructured. Okay. Yeah, you nailed it, right? So often I use this image when I'm training people on business development, right? They often enter a client meeting like a pinball in a pinball machine, not knowing where to take the conversation. It goes the same on any kind of meeting. And that's why I talk about an interview, right? Being that meeting. If it's unstructured, and why I've said I'm very structured. I like that format. I like to have flexibility. I like people to be able to show their own personality and kind of go off script a little bit. But having that structure just make sure that there's consistency, and especially, so the unstructured approach typically, right, it's without a set format of predetermined questions. Some questions may have been prepared, like, tell me about yourself, which is often one that candidates have a hard time responding to, actually. Different questions may be asked of different applicants because interviewers formulate questions based on their responses, which is part of the art of that conversation. So your interviews, if you are more of a structured approach, need to be structured, but you also have to bring in some of that unstructured so that you're not just robotic and not just sort of getting their answer and then going to the next question. You need to have that flow of conversation. So additional types of questions will need to be formulated based on their responses. But if you're always taking that unstructured approach, it does lack that reliability and that precision of a structured interview. So if you're interviewing 10 candidates for the same job, they've got similar resumes, and you need to narrow it down to 3 to send to the client like quickly, and it's unstructured and every question is different, like it's going to be really hard. If you guys do candidate profiling and send a little profile on the candidates or whatever, or a matrix, whatever the format is, it's going to be hard to do that because you're going to have all different types of questions, and it's going to be challenging to really decipher, right, which one really deserves to be in front of the client. So my, again, personal approach is more of that structured with building in some of that, that flexibility.
And in this case, right, this is just an example. This isn't one of our interview forms, but it's just an example, right, of using a structured format. And this will allow you to have consistency. So candidates are asked the same predetermined questions, and bias is reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions, which are based on an analysis of the job duties and requirements. More subjective and irrelevant questions are not asked. So which style, and again, there's no right or wrong. It is all personal preference. But I'm curious to, if you guys typed into chat, do you tend to take more of a structured approach? And I'll tell you, when I started in recruiting, my approach was, here's a resume, right? Candidate's coming in, print the resume off, go to the printer, pick it up, go sit down with the candidate. Nothing in front of me except for a resume and a pen. And all of my interview notes were on the side of the resume, along, over the back, flipping things all over, maybe a little sticky pad if I had it. That was how I got started until I really knew what I was doing. And then I had notes everywhere on sides of a resume. Well, guess what? If I was off on vacation and one of my colleagues was covering my desk and they're trying to look at a resume and they're like, I don't understand, right? Now most of us have more complex and good ATS tracking systems, and a lot of us have policies. You have to put everything in the ATS, but still, I learned quickly how unstructured interviews were just too chaotic. So in chat, which style do you normally take? Okay, so someone says competency depends on who you're meeting, the type of the role. Okay. And on that, so unstructured, structured behavioral. Any other approaches that you, who else takes different approaches? So on that one where it says type of role, another thing that I typically have done is sort of something that I always liked is I had a variety of different interview forms, same template, same format, but just a little bit of different questions if it depends on that candidate. So if I was interviewing an industrial sales candidate, I had a form for them. Industrial sales manager, a form for them. Communications candidate, marketing candidate, different forms, same flow, same sort of template and structure, but with a little bit of different questions depending on the type of role. Okay, so the thing to be thinking about again is there's all those different interview types and whatever style appeals to you, but you will get a more sort of a more structured, calculated approach to who are the best candidates for the job. The interview structure, even though we may be interviewing numerous candidates each week, it is still important to acknowledge the need for good interview structure and to follow it. Structure will give us that greater opportunity for that consistency and that accuracy. So whether you use a form or not, just knowing a general agenda, right? And what does that look like? So it's not, you don't feel like you're a pinball in a pinball machine, right? With every candidate that you have a in-person or video or phone interview with, that it's just something that's always different, right? It becomes so a little bit kind of chaotic when you're trying to decipher so many things. One of the downfalls of doing something frequently can be complacency. And so I saw very early on, there's a lot of veterans in this group, right? A lot of 3+ 10-year individuals in the group. And it's so easy, and myself included, to become complacent. As soon as we deviate from the structure, we are in danger of missing vital information. So just to kind of recap a little bit on sort of the overall process, right? There's so many different elements of what constitutes a good interview structure. Obviously, starting off with the introduction, the pleasantries, breaking ice, that kind of thing, agenda setting. So just like any kind of meeting, right? Whether you're meeting with a client, any kind of meeting is great to set that agenda. And you want to make sure that you do that by providing that structure so the candidate knows what they're expecting. And then at the same time, you can bring them back to the agenda if they start going off track, right? And we've all been there, right? We've all had candidates that you ask a question and they've responded to the entire interview form in one question. And so how do we reel them back in, right? So bring them back, say, you know, we really need to stick the agenda. We've only got you scheduled for 30 minutes, still a lot to go through. So giving them a bit of that structure, right? Today, we're going to talk about, you know, lots of questions, understand your skills, you know, different capabilities, some of your successes, things that you're proud about. We're going to talk about that next ideal role that you're looking for. At the same time, if we have an opportunity for you, we're going to talk about that opportunity and then go from there. And then just set that overall structure. And then the two opening questions, right? There's sort of something that I always like to do is asking them, tell me about yourself. And I ask them that right out of the gate. It does tend to catch them off guard because it tends to be a question they have a hard time answering. But I like to ask that out of the gate because it's going to be the first thing that our clients ask them out of the gate. So I like to see how they respond, right? And then I'll say to them, I'll ask them questions about, think about your most significant career accomplishment. What is it? Tell me about it. Why did you pick that one thing? Great. We're going to explore a little bit further now around things. So I want to get them kind of in a positive mindset, talking about themselves, what they're proud of, put them at a little bit at ease. Then that skills assessment and capabilities, right? I'll ask them, more detailed discussion about the role, the responsibilities, the accomplishments, and I dig and I dig and I dig. So what percentage of time have you spent doing what? Right? During an average week, I might meet 5 to 10 individuals who do something similar to you. I'd love to learn how you stand out, right? Walk me through all the roles that you've had. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank yourself and why? What is the biggest mistakes that maybe you've made at work? What else have you done in your career that have enhanced your skills? Let's learn about those capabilities, right? What are you proud about? What are some of the things that you've done that other individuals in your organization may not be doing? What would impress another employer, right? And then I'm going to go into, throughout that same process, asking behavioral questions. I'm going to ask a few that's relevant, and we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to obviously spend time and say, listen, this is the most important part of our conversation is your wish list, right? Provides that candidate an opportunity to describe the role that they believe would be ideal. As a consultant, we do need to judge if their expectations are realistic, right? So how many hours do you want to work? What do you like about working in certain places? Under what circumstances would you like a role? How important is money versus job content? What kind of people do you not want to work with, right? Obviously the compensation questions, asking them what's important. And then if you have a role, presenting that opportunity. And that ties back to the job order, right? Going back to that job order that you took or your account manager, somebody in your team took, and being able to then present that opportunity when appropriate and really be enthusiastic and passionate about that to get them excited, right? Candidate questions that they may have, and then closing to next steps. So just kind of, this is sort of my typical flow. Obviously the behavioral questions will tie into skills assessment and capability assessments, but it's just sort of something I wanted to put in there to signify that it's important to be asking those types of questions. Out of curiosity, a couple of people have already shared, in chat, type in just a yes or no, do you ask questions that is purely just kind of going off of the resume, or are you asking behavioral and situational type questions? So just a simple yes, you are asking behavioral questions, or no, you don't typically do it because you're not sure maybe what that exactly looks like. Okay, yes, 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 I do, yes, I do. Behavioral, yeah, okay. Excellent, great. So then this will be easy breezy. You guys will have already be accommodated, or what's the word, acquainted with this approach. So most frequently used types of structured interviews. So again, it's good to obviously do the resume walkthrough, ask your typical questions. How does it relate to the roles? But more and more companies, I'm not talking about recruiting firms, but your clients are interviewing using these approaches. So if we're not interviewing our own candidates with a behavioral interview style, how do we know how they're going to respond? How do we know how they're going to be able to fare in that type of interview? So it's good for us to ask them some of those questions, because then it gives us a coaching opportunity to help them before they go to that interview, if they really struggle with it. So we want to be asking them these types of questions. So the first one that we're going to talk about is that behavioral, right? Which is typically the best predictor of what people will do in the future is what they have done in the past in similar circumstances. So this is more about the past. What have they done in the past? And these do tend to be the trickiest for candidates. So it's really great for you to use them when you meet with them and really prepare them. Some of the things that I've done, depending on the role and how much time I need to invest in it, I might do role playing with that candidate to make sure that they're comfortable. I might send them a list from Google on the 50 famous behavioral style interview questions for them to be aware of, right? So it's important for them to be thinking about that. And then just some examples, right, of what that looks like. So what does past behavior, how does that predict future behavior, right? Tell me about a time when you've worked with a difficult client, unhappy customer, you motivated others, You had to solve a problem with little guidance. You had to persuade leadership to make an unpopular decision where you showed initiative and took the lead. Tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with an immediate supervisor. Tell me about a time when you went above and beyond, right? So asking these types of questions, and it might be specific. I didn't give examples in here because everyone has a different kind of desk and niche that you recruit for, but there might be very specific types of behavioral situational questions as it's relevant to that person's job. And then what I'm looking for is how they respond, right? How do they respond? And then I can help them in learning a little bit more about this. And again, if you know that your client, if you've have intel that the client's going to ask situational behavioral questions, or even if you don't know because the client doesn't want to share what kind of interview it is, you want all of your candidates. Every single candidate should be prepared for that if they're going to an interview, directly to an interview. In some instances on temp, we just send them day one, they're on the job, they're not going through this process. So it's really going to be depending on the situation. But we want to make certain that we coach those candidates on this process every time. And someone just put that into chat. It's a good approach for them to adopt when answering. So the STAR method, right? The situation, describe the context. What was the task, right? What was the action? What was the result? So here might be an example, okay, of that. So, oh, and then there's one more thing, actually. It's STAR L. In chat, does anybody know what L stands for? What can this STAR L mean? Does anybody know what L means? Let's see who gets that into chat. Any guesses? Learn. Okay, thank you, Lou. So learn. So it's the STAR L. So this, I'm going to describe the situation. This was the task at hand. This was the action I took. This was the result. But what I learned from it, right? So the L is the learn. And I like that. I don't know if that's a known thing or if I created that. I have no idea. It's been years since I've known that. But it's that formula is a good approach that you want your candidates to adopt. So again, a good approach for you to ask. So a situation might be, what was the situation? So they might describe the environment, they might describe the type of people or the equipment they had to work with. They might need to discuss what the task was that they were presented with, what was required of them when they addressed that task. Was it a project itself? For the action, what did the applicant actually do? Why did the applicant choose this course of action? When addressing that action, what was the result? When addressing the results, think of how their action affected the outcome of the situation. What was the result, right? What did the job applicant learn from the experience? So this is a formula typically for a panel interview, but sometimes people one-on-one, on a one-on-one interview, they may also do this. So I really, really, really encourage that you adopt it into your interviewing approach and training the candidates on that and getting them prepared. And there's tons of information on Google that you could send them or they can research. Then the other one is situational. And a lot of times people get confused. Like, isn't behavioral the same as situational? And they kind of interchange that. It's actually different. So does anybody know, just come on, you can sort of speak directly on the difference between behavioral and situational. What would situational be different, right? Oh, I've got the answer here. Never mind. The future. So the situational is specific tasks and behaviors related to the job that are identified and then used to probe questions that probe how they would behave, right? So behavioral was what they've done, right, in the past and how they could speak to that. This dictates the future. So what would you do if? What would you do when, right? So an example might be, what would you do if you made a mistake that no one else noticed? What would you do if you were asked to perform a task you've never been done before? What would you do if an angry and dissatisfied customer confronted you? How would you resolve their concern? So again, a little bit of a varying, just a sort of slight, but good to ask these questions. And the behavior one, even though it dictates the past, which could dictate future behavior, I'm finding that more and more clients are using situational about what would you do when, if. And this does seem to confuse, and candidates find this a little bit tricky. So this in particular, right? Because if you say to them, Google behavioral style interviews, they'll do that, but really want them thinking about the situational as well. Lots of examples and stuff on site. So I'm going to just pause here and ask if anybody has any questions or comments or anecdotes to share. Okay.
I have a question on situational.
Yeah.
Typically, wouldn't these be more sort of like a philosophical discussion almost? I find that people have sometimes good ideas about what they would do, but when it comes to action, they may be stressed or whatever and completely forget about.
Totally, 100%. And that's a great comment there, that a lot of it is philosophical, a lot of it is hypothetical. And so really what the client, right, what they're looking for, that, you know, an interviewer, what they're looking for is to see one strategy, right? How does somebody, how do they start, what's their strategic thinking? How do they approach particular situations? Can they draw on from the past? So if you're preparing a candidate for situational, you'll say, what have you done in the past that might be similar to what that situation might be, right? Have you ever done something that nobody noticed the mistake, right? How did you respond to that? So they can still draw on their past experience on how they might respond to what they would do. And so it's important. I always say to a candidate before they go in for an interview, like, pen to paper, write down all of the things that you've done, right? All your accomplishments, your successes, your contributions. You know, how did you sort of, what did you do specifically part of that project? Not just the team, but what was your part of that? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the mistakes that you've made in your career? What some of the things you wish you could have done differently, right? So that they have like a really good set of how can I respond to some of these things? And then start thinking about how your past might be able to respond to whether it's a behavioral, like what have you done or what would you do? And then if they haven't actually ever been in a situation that's relevant to that situation, the interviewer is just looking for strategy. And there is typically there's not always like a concrete right or wrong, but it's, does their response, does it seem genuine? Does it seem truthful? Does it seem authentic? That kind of stuff. And it is hard, right? Those are harder questions, without a doubt. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to do a little bit of a yes or no, or like a true and false. So I'm going to list off, and what I want you guys to write into chat, just a simple yes or no. I'm going to ask you 25 questions. We're going to go through it quickly, and just a simple yes or no. So in thinking about how do we conduct ourselves in an interview, right? What kinds of questions are okay to ask, and what kind of questions are not okay to ask? But what are also some types of questions that are not okay for our clients to ask, right? For our candidates to have to go through an awkward experience. And I know I've had to do a lot of coaching with clients at times. It's like, you can't ask those kinds of things. And so it's good to have that awareness. And some of these are all very common sense. So I'm going to put up the first question here. So just type into chat, yes or no. Can you ask these questions? Are you a Canadian citizen? And I'll wait till I have a majority. Okay, most of you said no, and the correct answer is no. Another way you would say that is, are you authorized to work in Canada, or do you require sponsorship? Number two, what languages do you read, speak, or write fluently? Okay, so a lot of consensus. Yes, you can ask that. Okay, next one. What days are you available to work, or any restrictions on working certain days? Can you ask that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, yes. Number four, are you a member of a professional or trade group that is relevant to this industry? The correct answer is yes. Number five, how old are you, or when did you graduate from high school? No. A resounding no, right? And so another way of asking that is, right, is are you over the age of 18, right? Number six, how much longer do you plan to work before you retire? Nope, lots of no's, lots of no's. Okay, correct, it's no. Another way of saying is how much, what are your long-term goals? right? What are your long-term goals? What are your long-term plans? I see you worked at ESSO. Do you know John Smith? Okay, interesting. I'm getting lots of no's. Okay, so that is correct. The answer is no, right? Are there any employees with ESSO that would provide you a favorable reference? Number 8, have you worked or earned a degree under another name? So that one, actually, a few of you have said no. It's actually yes, you can ask that. Do you have a plan to have children?
So no.
So it's a no. Are you available to work overtime on occasion, or can you travel when required? Would be another way of asking, right? That's another way to ask that question without coming around and saying, you know, do you need a babysitter? Can you get a babysitter on short notice for overtime travel? Can you ask that question? No, right? We don't, because again, that could lead to discrimination. So you'll be required, another way of saying it is you'll be required to work or work overtime on short notice. Will this be a problem for you? It's a different way to ask it. Who is your closest relative to notify in case of an emergency? Can you ask that?
Yes.
Okay, someone says yes after hire, not in the interview stage. Okay, so the answer for that is no. A different way of saying it is in case of emergency, who should we notify? What do your parents do for a living? Okay. So a different way of asking that, and I've been asked that in my past careers. I'm like, why does it matter, right? So how did you become interested in this industry? How did you become interested in accounting and finance? How did you become interested in supply chain, right? So what do your parents do for a living? Are you vaccinated for COVID? Can you ask that?
Yes.
So this is one, okay, depends, right? Depends the field, depends. Yes, we need to ask consent to discuss their vax status. Okay, so this one is a little bit of that kind of tricky one, right? And it's depending, right? There's different provinces that have different legislations. Different companies have different vaccine policies depending on the role. So typically speaking, again, this isn't a yes or like this isn't an absolute right or wrong, but some approach or a way to look at that is if you're really not sure, obviously check with your company policies. Typically what we would say is just saying to the candidate, some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that? Some employers have a vaccine policy. Does that preclude you? Is that kind of close to saying it, but rather than coming right out and saying, are you vaccinated? So a way, again, is some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that? And so every situation is different. I know that in our organization, that's our approach, right? We just don't want to get into any hot water because the requirements and the policies and the guidelines are changing rapidly all the time, that we just prefer to keep it a little bit. So that this isn't a right or wrong. It's everyone will be a little bit different, but that's sort of our general approach. If you get pregnant, will you continue to work and will you come back after maternity leave? Okay. A big no, right? It could just be, you know, again, what are your long-term plans? We've always had a woman do this job. How do you think you will stack up? Right? The answer is no, a big no, right? What do you have to offer the company? What kinds of things do you have? What do you offer the company? What do you offer the client? What are some of the things that you bring to the table that would make you stand out from the other candidates? Have you ever been disciplined for your behavior at work? So I have this as a yes, that you can ask that question. I've never asked it. I've asked, has there been any circumstances in any of your positions, right? Especially if I do see a year, I'll come right out and say, like, were you let go? Under what circumstances? What happened? What was it performance related, right? So I think that it's okay. Do you smoke or drink? Big no, right? Maybe you have a company, though, that has a no smoking policy, which most buildings you can't smoke indoors. That's for sure. But, I guess another way of saying, in the past, have you been disciplined for violating company policies forbidding the use of things like tobacco products? Are you able to reach items on a shelf that's 5 feet tall? Okay. So this one's kind of a mixed one, because if it's a bona fide occupational requirement that they need to be able to reach on a shelf that's 5 feet tall, if that's either working in a warehouse or they're working in retail or somewhere they need to be able to reach up high, right? That could become part of that bona fide occupational requirement. And so a way of saying it is, this job requires that one be able to lift 50 pounds to put stuff on a shelf that's about, at 6 feet high, 5.5 feet high. Is that going to be an issue for you, right? So it's asking that question, but not directly. How much do you weigh? Right? A big no. How many sick days did you take last year? Okay. Another way of saying it. How many days of work last year did you miss? How many days of work did you miss last year? But you're not asking about sick days. Are you able to perform the specific duties of this position, or do you have any restrictions allowing you to perform the duties of the specific role? Okay, a resounding yes. Awesome. Okay, just a few more. Are you able to perform the essential functions of this job without reasonable accommodations? Okay, awesome. Are you able to start work at 8 a.m.? Are you willing to relocate? And last, have you ever been convicted of X, fraud, theft, and so on? Right? Big no, right? Okay. One of the things that you could also say is that part of our process, or part of our client's process, is to do a bunch of background checks. And throughout those background checks, I always like to know in advance, is there anything that may surprise us? Is there anything that we might need to be aware of ahead of time? And then leave it at that. So the point of wanting to inform you about a lot of this is to really outline the how and what to ask if you really need to ask certain things. Right? I know we all like personal interviews, or we could chat about families, or we could chat about hockey, but it's important that we also keep them really professional, because you just never know. We sometimes think our candidates are our new best friends, but when they leave our office or they get off that phone call with us, I'm sure that there could be comments made about the lack of our professionalism if we aren't careful about how we handle ourselves. So things that I just wanted to point out here is some other types of interview questions that might be newer types of interview questions that may not have landed on your interview forms 2 years ago, but might now make their way onto your screening and interview forms, right? How have you approached building professional relationships while working remotely? How did you manage working remotely, or how are you managing it? Tell me about your biggest strengths and how did you put them into use over the past 2 years, right? What did you learn about yourself working through this pandemic? Are you willing to work remotely? How about in person? How did you spend your time while unemployed? Right? Was there anything that you did this year for your professional development? Right? Let's say they've lost a job. Have they been doing things? Have they been taking online courses? Have they been trying to enhance their skills? Have they taken on little side projects? Have they been doing some temporary stuff if they're typically a permanent or a direct hire? Was there, some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that, right? That's that, again, that question. So just other types of questions. And there's, I'm sure, a whole plethora, but it's sort of maybe saying, what is on my interview form? What is on my screening document? Have I updated it, right? Because if you haven't, now is certainly a good time to think about updating that. We're going to just talk very briefly about some potential roadblocks. For every great candidate we find, there could be potential roadblocks that could prevent us from placing them into jobs that we have. To better get, so that the better we get at identifying roadblocks early, the more time we must deal with them if possible and work towards a successful outcome. Without identifying them, we may not even become aware of them until it is too late. And so one of the things that I said earlier is I always take that approach. I do. Recruiters, we love surprises only when, let's say we put two candidates for the interview and they hired both. That's a great surprise. But typically speaking, recruiters don't like surprises. So I take a no surprises approach to the work that I do. And by doing that, I'm always thinking, 5 steps ahead. What are roadblocks, right? What could happen here? And then really asking lots of questions to that. So what are some examples? Like we'll open dialogue here, right? Come off mute. What are some potential roadblocks that we may encounter with a candidate that can inhibit our ability to place them?
Their car breaks down.
Okay, so the car breaks down, let's say on the way to meet you or on the way to their interview or on their way to day 1 on the job, right?
Right.
Okay, what else can be a roadblock? What else can get in the way of us placing them?
Recently, like with companies putting vaccination policies, if they implement one during the recruitment process, that could provide a roadblock if it's not something we screened on.
Definitely. Yeah.
A poorly written resume.
Yeah, poorly written resume could be a potential roadblock because you might dismiss the resume, right? Go, I'm not going to call this person, or the client might be like, what kind of resume is this, right? What else?
Is actively interviewing, like multiple interviews in pipeline.
Yes, for sure. Taking too long.
Late for interview.
Waiting for the interview?
Late.
Oh, late, yes.
Arrived late for interview.
Definitely. Not something that's going to bode well for the client, especially. Yeah.
Technical issues nowadays too with virtual interviews.
Okay, so technical things. So yeah, so you guys are thinking of a lot of good ideas there. What else? Other examples that could be a roadblock to getting that candidate placed.
I think a big one for me is when I'm talking to people, I always ask them if they have a vehicle, because our start times usually range from like 6:30. So if their transportation is bus, then it's having to look for different opportunities for them. Yeah,
that's a great one.
I think also the commute, sometimes candidates will search the commute, but then when they actually do the commute, it's a different story, and sometimes they leave the job because of it.
Definitely, right? They might even look on Waze or some Google Maps and go, oh, it's not that bad. But then they drive in the middle of rush hour there and back, or they test it out and they're like, oh, not happening for sure. Okay. Any others?
Client can make a poor impression on the candidate when they.
Yeah, that's a great one, right?
That happens.
It totally happens. I mean, I've had lots of hard conversations with clients where I'm like, what are you doing? Come on, we got to prep our clients. That's a whole other topic, but we have to also prepare our clients before they interview our candidates, because it's a two-sided interview, right? And gone are the days where it's just the client interviewing the candidate, and then the candidate has to tell them why they should hire that person. It's the opposite, right? It's the other side. It's such a high candidate demand marketplace that there's just not enough great candidates fast enough, that it's the opposite. We need the clients putting their best foot forward and selling them to the candidate just as much as the candidate has to sell themselves to the client. And that I do a lot of coaching, or I've done a lot of coaching with clients around that, and now it's uber critical. So that's a great example. What else?
sometimes they can change their availabilities, like they want to be hired, so they will tell us, oh, I'm available all day, every day. And then when it comes to schedule them, it's a whole different story.
Right. Okay, that availability changes. So there's so many things that can get in the way that as long as we recognize the amount, there's roadblocks and what those roadblocks could be, and we get in front of that roadblock before it even happens, and we can have good conversations with clients and candidates before the roadblock. So here's sort of another list of all different kinds of examples too, right? Other jobs they've applied for might creep up, right? Other jobs they have yet to apply for that they're not telling you they're going to apply for, counteroffers, contract extension, maybe they're on contract and they've extended their contract, contractual issues, maybe restrictive covenants, contractual issues, nature of work, monthly pay, notice periods. Like I've had a candidate that needed to give like a 6-week notice period. That's like the client's like, I need them in like 3 weeks. Person situation, right? That family considerations, visa requirements, the commute, the geography, culture, the environment, not liking who they met, bonuses, right? I've had so many candidates, especially because I was doing sales recruiting, was like, oh, I forgot I have a $30,000 bonus that's due in like 6 months and I still need to be there. Will your company give me a signing bonus? Unlikely, right? So then you lose out. Pension, skeletons in the closet, poor references, all of those other things that you guys have said as well. But these are other things to be thinking about. And the way to try to mitigate this is by getting in front of it, by always asking lots and lots and lots of questions to these things throughout the entire process, right? When you first screen them, when you interview them, when you present a job to them, when you prepare them for the interview, when you debrief, when you have the next interview, another debrief, when you present the role, when they go to resign, like all throughout, there's so many things that we have to close and reclose to make sure that we're in front of it. So we're getting towards the end and we're moving on to step 4. So we're talking a little bit here about testing, different kinds of background checks, like driving abstracts, education verification. We're not going in depth on those things, but just different testing to think about. And then of course, references. So looking at different types of background investigations, different types of reference checks, looking at former employers, obviously current supervisors, commercial credit rating companies. Some companies will do that depending on the nature of somebody's position, any written references, which typically I don't see much of those anymore. Social networking sites, unfortunately. Well, there are background checks, and there are all sorts of new kind of platforms and organizations that do social network checking. That's totally legitimate. So these are just some of the things that they might be looking at, plus a variety of other sources. Now, one of the things that I've always said, and maybe you guys are all sort of in that same thinking, is when I ask for references, I'll say, listen, I need your supervisors, right? I really just need your supervisors. And a lot of candidates, that to me is another roadblock. To me, that's one of those red flags that nobody mentions that when we're talking about potential red flags, is when they can't provide you a reference. When a candidate's like, well, that reference retired. Well, that reference is no longer there. That person's moved on. Well, I don't really know. I don't know if I can get any references from there. Then are my red flags, my spidey senses are going up. And so for me, I'm pretty firm. Like, we need references from your former employers. Current supervisors bonus if they know you're looking and it's a good working relationship and it's safe to do so. But no references, no moving forward. And we just recently went through this where a candidate could not and would not provide any references under any circumstances. And for my recruiter that I was working with and coaching her quite through this process, she was just heartbroken because this is like that purple squirrel kind of job where there's like nobody. And it was in a remote area of BC, almost impossible. And I said to her, you can't put them forward. No references. There's a reason why. Don't do it. And she didn't. And later on, we found out that it was a good call. So it's crucial that we do that. And so part of that reference checking, I don't know about everybody, but it's in our policy. It's in our written agreements. It's in our contract. So we are contractually obligated to do reference checking. And it's just a part of the process. And they expect that, right? That we will conduct references on every candidate sent to a candidate. Why would a candidate ever provide a reference that would not be favorable, right? It's a great question, Arno, and I've had that many, many times where a candidate, they think, right? They think, oh yeah, sure. They think that they had a good working relationship with somebody. They think they left on good terms. They think that they were quote unquote downsized or quote unquote restructured because that's what went on their exit letter, but not necessarily. So I've actually, majority of times, yeah, like 70% of the time you get a favorable reference, but there's those times where you're like, oh, okay. And that's good to know. So the reference checking, again, it's a contractual obligation that most of us, I think, would have with our clients. I know for us, we can't even enter the placement. Like we physically can't hit placed until we've actually checked off all of the references that have been given, which I think is a great quality control measure. And I really recommend that this become a part of everybody's process. Always do at least one reference check, maybe two, before even submitting them to the client. Do one or two more after the client wants to move forward. If you're doing temp contract and you don't even have the interview and you're sending them right to the job site, of course, you need to have those references beforehand. And so getting the reference, it should become part of that daily routine. And again, it gains that assurance that the individual has been successful in their jobs. There's no skeletons in the closet, no red flags, nothing that's going to come back to bite us. To validate or dispel any concerns you may have developed. Gain a better understanding of the type of supervision, their ethics, the skills, right? And then to have a good legal stand if the candidate doesn't work out, right? To have a good legal stand if the candidate doesn't work out. So it's really an important part of that process. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's just a refresher. But again, we really want to work on obtaining those references. And I'll tell a candidate that, like, in my first phone screen, I typically say, who are your references? Can you send me your references? We're not going to call anybody. I just like to have that out of the gate so that when the time comes, we can act quickly. So we can get those references. We'll let you know when it's happening. But I don't wait until the client says, get me some references. And then I call the candidate and then I'm delaying and it's wasting time. That happens right at the beginning. And sometimes candidates are like, I don't want to do that until I have an actual job. Fine. But if you don't ask, then you don't get. So we really want to make certain that we don't want to accept evasive or incomplete answers when doing the reference check, right? Listen for hesitations, listen for change in tone or silence, right? How things are said may be more important than what is actually said, right? Question their response, use open-ended questions and encourage the reference to elaborate on their answers. So what happens if we don't do references? Let's just do open dialogue. What happens if we don't do the references?
We could get in hot water with the client because it could blow up. Contract can blow up.
It can blow up. It can totally blow up. And if you guys haven't done the business ethics session yet with Steve Jones, I know because I've taught that one a number of times. I believe there's still a conversation there about a case, right? An example of when a reference check wasn't conducted. And that particular individual, this is a true story, particular individual was had stolen like $200,000 worth of money at previous employers. There was like all sorts of things that had come up. And had the reference checks been done and the background checks and all of those checks been done, then they would have known that. But then this candidate was placed somewhere and the same thing happened. What happened? Company sues recruiting agency, not a good situation. So there are checks and balances literally that we need to go through to make sure that we don't end up in hot water.
I've got an example of one that kind of blew up on me. So I did a reference check and I asked a series of questions, and one of them, the reply was, well, I wouldn't have taken them to Italy to start a new company if I didn't think highly of them. And so that was kind of like, oh, wow, okay, you know. And then I was at my daughter's wedding, and one of the people that we had invited was the HR manager where this guy worked. And I said, by the way, you know, we're thinking of hiring this guy because he's got great references. Oh my God, don't tell me you're hiring him. You know, and unfortunately, while I was away, they did hire him on my recommendation.
Did it work out?
No.
Oh, yeah, so that's a good example. Yeah, for sure. The irony, right? It's a small world, that's for sure. It's a small world. On that, the other thing that we do want to be careful of is I've heard, I've seen recruiters who will do a reference check and it's not in the favor of the candidate. So then they either don't even put that reference check in. They'll be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get a different one because that one was bad. Oh, that one was bad too. Okay, I'm gonna find another one. Oh, good. We got 2 good references, 2 bad references. They didn't even tell the client about the 2 bad ones. That to me would not be playing fair in the sandbox. That to me would not be an ambassador of the industry. So as a best practice, I've always been fully transparent with the client. Said, here's the good, here's the bad, right? Let's have a conversation about it. And so to me, transparency is everything for reputation, for trust, for credibility, to get repeat business. The client will thank you for that in the long run. So I always prefer to recommend that people take that high road and not fudge it, right? I've heard of people sort of taking a reference and totally fudging it and changing it. When the client has done validation, sometimes they'll do their own check, right? We do it, and then they're going to call that same person, and that person's like, what? I didn't say that. So be really mindful of that. No matter how badly you want to place that person, it will come back to bite you. Other things to think about is employment testing. And there's so many different types. Oh, go ahead. Oh, so there's, we know how hiring can be time consuming. It can be costly. It can be stressful. And, again, the candidates, they might have an impressive resume. Maybe they interviewed really well, but they might fall really short when it comes to performance because of mismatches between traits and the job requirements. And so to mitigate the risk of that by making some of those hiring mistakes, lots of our clients and a lot of our own companies, right, will utilize pre-employment tests. They'll use different kinds of online assessments to sort of find an efficient, a systematic approach to gather objective information on a candidate. Should the clients only solely rely on that? My answer is no. I know we don't solely just rely on that. We use it as a tool to look at the big picture. So there's a variety of different types, and we're not going to go through every single kind, but there's lots of different ones that you guys are probably already aware of from your clients or within your own organizations, but different types of tests, right? Aptitude tests, right? Or knowledge tests, right? Test the knowledge about a concept or different practice relevant to the successful job. Personality tests, right? Psychological assessments, test their feelings, traits, behaviors. Skills test, performance test, testing their ability to perform a certain task. There could be other things like physical ability tests. Usually this is for a bona fide occupational requirement where they would do that. Physical ability or medical tests really do need to be attached to a bona fide occupational requirement. And then work samples. So that could be testing their ability, maybe doing in Excel, right? There's different testing within Excel. How do they do that? How quickly do they type? It could be, bring a work sample. Maybe the test or the assessment is create, if they're in marketing, how would you create an ad for this particular product, right? There's a variety of different ways and different work sample tests that are relevant, or maybe a pilot, right? Doing an air stimulation. There's lots of different things that people can do work samples. So just a whole variety of options. Some recruiting firms will do that for free for their clients. Some it's for a cost. Some they don't offer it at all and they have a third party. So just something to be thinking about as well. That's just part of that whole decision-making process. But again, just an extra special note on that medical and physical ability test really does need to be under that bona fide occupational requirement. And then we're getting to that area where we do need to be careful. And I've talked to some clients about this. They don't really do it anymore, but early on in my career, a long, long time ago, right, we had to talk about, according to the human rights code, to conduct this nature of a test, it needs to be a bona fide occupational requirement. And unlike our neighbors in the South, here in Canada, we have provisions in that human rights codes with respect to those things. There are exceptions, right? There are exceptions allowed after conditional offer and employment made in writing, the applicant having been informed before the offer. And again, it really needs to be job specific and job related. So it's a procedure used to defend a discriminatory employment practice or policy on the grounds that the policy or practice was adopted in an honest and good faith belief that it was reasonably necessary to assure the efficient and economical performance of the job without endangering employees or the general public. Some benefits to the pre-employment assessment, right? Really getting to know the candidates. right? It can take months to really get to know a person, to understand what motivates them, how they communicate, how they think. But these pre-employment tests can help see not just what a person has done, but a little bit around maybe who they are. It can help screen the candidates faster. The clients help screen the candidates faster so they can result in, you know, if there's a high volume, right, these assessments can be administered early in the process so that recruiters or clients can focus on finding the right individuals. Increases objectivity, right? Biases do creep into the hiring process. Interviewers might give high evaluations based on impressions they've made from the resume or favor a candidate unconsciously because maybe they attended the same college or the same sports team or what that might be. So we want to increase that objectivity. Some of these tests help recognize potential in candidates, right? We utilize one in our own company that helps recognize our own potential. So a lot of organizations do that. A lot of recruiting companies, your clients can also use to help raise red flags, right? If there's concerns. Can help reduce turnover, increase productivity, which I don't have on there, and then also avoid costly mistakes. So as much as these tests can get in the way of our recruitment with our clients, I know, I'm sure others have that same experience where you've got the right candidate, you interviewed them, you profiled them, you screened them, you reference checked them, everything was great. And then the final step in the process is the assessment. And they don't match the assessment to the letter, and then it's a no. And you're gutted, right? We actually just went through that. One of my colleagues, 9 interviews in the process, and then a full half day on with an industrial psychologist on testing, wasn't to the letter, and it was a no. Painful for the candidate, painful for the recruiter to start that over again. So as much as these are great, we also want to be also talking to our clients and really understanding at the beginning of the interview process, at the beginning of the job search. How do you live and breathe by them? Is it a tool that helps? Or if they don't pass it, is it a no? It's important to just have that mindfulness and that awareness of that, right? And because it doesn't guarantee a fit. So the more we have a dialogue with the clients, hopefully at least you know what you're getting into. So with the example of my colleague who had that candidate go through 9 of them for it to be a no, now he knows. And he can properly coach the candidates through the process and hopefully have a really good conversation with the client if they're willing to even bend and maybe do the assessment first, if that's like they live and breathe by it. So it's just good to have that awareness of that. Just to summarize everything that we've been talking about today, you know, of course, we want our client to use all of the sources of information to make the best all-around decision. And we're very much a part of that, obviously finding the candidates, assessing them, screening them, testing them, profiling them, referencing, all of those things. And we can have an active role. Sometimes they'll say, well, who would you hire of these 5? Right? So we want to have an active role and we can help them through that and consult and coach when it makes sense to. And you've done all your due diligence. You've gathered a lot of valuable information, right? So you want them to look at more than just a resume or just a test or just an interview in isolation, depending on the job, depending on the requirement, depending on the situation. So here's an example of all the things, right, that they can do and that we can do, that we can bring to the clients, that we can help them with and help them work through to make the proper decision, right? Resumes, the phone screen, the application forms, tests, interviews, profiling, references, background checks, work samples. What do they have on LinkedIn recommendations, right? Have we placed them before somewhere that was a successful placement, maybe on a temporary contract, and they fulfilled the placement, right? They completed it to the end of the contract. So these are just an example of all the things that we can do to check our boxes and make sure that we're giving the clients everything to make good hiring decisions so that the candidate fits the job, that the candidate fits the company, and vice versa. And I'm just going to leave, I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to say, you know, a big congratulations, right? We've gone through some of the basics of the recruitment and selection. For some of you, again, it might be a big refresher. Hopefully there's some new nuggets. For some of you, it may be all new information. And I really do want to thank you guys for joining me today. I do hope you found the session valuable, that it was a good use of your time. I appreciate the collaboration, the dialogue, the sharing. But what I'd like to do right now is just stop right here and then have open dialogue for any questions and answers before we go to the final slide.
I just want to really thank you for a wonderful presentation. And regardless of what people know, there's always more information to be had or from a different point of view, right? And depending sometimes on who presents it, it goes, oh, yes.
I appreciate that. So actually on that, so the thank you for that. And so for the last slide here, I would love for you guys, and then Jennifer, just again, a friendly note that you're going to all, I'm going to share a copy. You're going to get the PowerPoint. She's going to send you tomorrow in the recording. But just love to see what some of your biggest takeaways were from today's session. I know we went through a lot.
Jill, I'd like to say, you know, with all the experience that I have in the business, you have really done a very good job. We're going to share that with our entire recruiting staff here. You just did fine.
Oh, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not sure who said that though.
Well, is your first name Jill? I can't read that far.
Oh, it's Jill. Yes.
Jill. Okay. Just so I know who gave the class.
Oh, okay. I can see you now there. Yes. Margaret. Yes. Thank you.
Margaret.
Me. So in terms of takeaways, okay, so thank you guys. Lots of good compliments. Love to learn if there's something that you'll take with you, but keeping it interactive makes it much easier to follow. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys. Again, I hope you all took away at least one nugget with you. It's been a lot of fun. And I know tomorrow when Jennifer sends you the information, she'll attach my, I already saw that some of you connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you guys have any questions, she'll send my email address if you wanted to ask anything further about the stuff. And then again, the one thing to remember, guys, through this whole process is that at the end of it, right, we're still there with the candidate way beyond, right? We're always kind of having that ongoing relationship with the candidates once we've placed them. And, you know, that's how we continue to build our business as well, as having those good relationships. Thank you, everybody. I will give you 4 minutes back to your day by ending 4 minutes early. And I'll look forward to seeing any emails or LinkedIn connections with you all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Jill. And thank you all.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.